Curse of the Alpha, Episodes 1 and 2, a Tarker's Hollow serial. Written by Tasha Black. Narrated by Addison Spear. Chapter 1. Ainsley was having the dream again. She had worried that coming home to Tarker's Hollow would bring it back. Her hands twisted the sheets as she tossed in her old childhood bed. At the same time, she smelled the pine needles crunching underfoot as her dream self ran through the college woods. In the dream, she was always a teenager again. Brian Swinton, the new boy at school, ran a few steps behind her, laughing. Brian had just a few freckles on his cheeks that made you look at his eyes, his big, dreamy, hazel eyes. Once you were done with his eyes, which could be quite a while, you couldn't help but see how his t-shirt hugged his wide shoulders, and his Levi's hung from his narrow hips. And even though he was a new kid and quiet, he made Ainsley's heart beat loud, loud, loud. After school, he would walk her home, and sometimes Brian would try to pull her toward the woods, and Ainsley, who had always been a good girl, would sometimes let him. There they would kiss under the pine trees until Ainsley was dizzy and heated and pushed him away to run as fast as she could back home. He would call after her, both of them laughing. But the dream wasn't about one of those times. The dream was always about their last visit in the woods. In the quiet night of her parents' empty house, a more grown-up Ainsley thrashed in the sheets and tried desperately to wake up, but her traitorous feet carried her deeper into the woods, deeper into the dream. As she ran, her own laughter mingled with Brian's, close behind. At last, she stopped, whirled around and wrapped her arms around his neck, ready for a sweet, slow kiss. Instead, he spun them both around and pressed her back against a tree. He'd never done that before. Before she could react, he slid his hands gently down her ribcage and let his thumbs brush her nipples. Ainsley gasped as she took in the brand new sensations. Brian pressed his mouth to hers again and angled his whole lean body up against her soft one. She felt his heart pounding in his chest, and the hardened length of him throbbing against her hip. Her insides clenched in pleasure, and she deliberately pressed her breasts against his chest. He inhaled sharply and stilled for a moment, then devoured her mouth again, fists clenched in her hair now, his hips rocking that mysterious stiff bulge against her. In that moment, Ainsley felt a surge of awareness. Suddenly, she could hear every twig snap and every squirrel scamper in the woods. She could smell the wood shavings at the hardware store in the village and hear the train on the tracks in the city half an hour away, thundering toward Tarker's Hollow. What was happening to her? The sensory assault washed over Ainsley in a tidal wave until she felt that her heart could not keep beating. Even poor Brian Swinton, excited as he was, must have felt the change in her. He pulled away, panting. "What's wrong?" "I don't know," she said. I'm sorry, Tears welled in her eyes. "Listen, we don't have to make out, Ainsley. I know you have a lot of schoolwork, and you're a nice girl." From her bed, Ainsley wanted nothing more than to agree with him and walk away. But she knew that was useless. The dream would run its course. It always did. Teenaged Ainsley touched a cautious finger to Brian's lips, then cupped both hands around his familiar face, letting her thumbs brush over the freckles on the tops of his cheeks and staring into his hazel eyes. The smell of anxiety wafted off the light sweat on his brow. She ran her hands through his sandy hair and he closed his eyes. Her fingers traced the gentle swell of his biceps, and her nails raked slowly down his chest. He leaned into her hands, and she brought them back up to his face. "Being with you like this, it might just be my favorite thing," Ainsley breathed. Before he could respond, she grabbed his lower lip in her teeth and sucked down it gently. Something was building inside Ainsley, struggling to break free. Brian moaned softly. His hand cupped her breast, then worked its way down. He fumbled with the button of her jeans while they kissed. The sounds of the surrounding woods disappeared. Ainsley could hear nothing over the pounding of her own pulse. At last, the button gave way, and Brian slipped his fingers into the waistband of her cotton panties. There was a blur of movement, and a harsh growl. Then everything went black as the air filled with shrill, unnatural shrieks. Ainsley Connor finally opened her eyes in the safety of her old bedroom, her throat raw from screaming in her sleep. The dream was over, but the feeling of it still draped her like a thick fog. Any hope of rest was gone for the night. Chapter 2. Ainsley jumped out of bed, silk pajamas clinging to the cold sweat that covered her. A shiver ran through her at the late summer breeze drifting through the open bedroom window. The familiar trappings of Ainsley's youth surrounded her. Her parents had never taken down her boy band posters or packed away the shelves of trophies. Just sitting there made her feel like she was in high school again, her parents asleep at the end of the hall. Like she could run to their room, snuggle herself between the two of them, and everything would be all right. Of course, that wasn't the case. Her parents were dead. That's why she was here, reliving old nightmares in her childhood bedroom. Ainsley was a very practical person, but this particular dream, one she'd been having for the last 10 years, always left her feeling scared and lonely. And now she really was alone, in Tarker's Hollow, and anywhere, if she was being honest. She decided to head down to the kitchen for tea to soothe her throat. She slipped on a bathrobe and walked down the narrow hall of the creaky old Victorian. Her hand instinctively reached for a cell phone in her robe pocket, but came up empty. In New York, she would have found an email from a client or another agent to keep her busy, no matter the hour. But her phone was plugged in downstairs, where she had sworn not to touch it, and she had handed her client list over to a young upstart agent in her firm for the duration of this trip. Ainsley knew she needed to focus every waking moment on emptying this house so she could get back to New York, back to her real life, back to her clients, and out of Tarker's Hollow before the full moon. Boiling water hit the peppermint tea bag in her mug with a hiss. Ainsley brought the steaming brew to her face and inhaled. It took her back to after-school tea parties with her best friend, Grace Kwan Cortez, in this very kitchen. Ainsley set her mug on the round oak table, where it rested on a ring stain put there by so many previous cups. When Ainsley's parents died in the accident, Grace's parents had sent her a card. It read as though no time had passed since the day Ainsley left Tarker's Hollow at age 17 without looking back. In the card, Mrs. Cortez told Ainsley that she loved her, and they would always think of her as their daughter, and hoped she would think of them as her parents now. Mrs. Cortez also explained that they had set aside a bedroom for her. She could come home any time to stay, for as long as she wanted. Come home. The honesty had shattered Ainsley's frozen heart, and she'd immediately stuffed it in the bottom of her underwear drawer, unable to bring herself to throw it away. The Cortez family home and her own had been the settings of so many happy girlhood memories. She could lose herself wallowing in the past if she wasn't careful. That's why she was practically hiding out in the house. If she didn't bump into any of her old teachers or schoolmates, if she didn't call Mrs. Cortez, then she couldn't get sucked in. She could get in and get out, just like she planned. That was sort of the name of Ainsley's game. Since middle school, she had been what people might describe as a type A personality. She liked to ask questions and get things right on the first try. She and Grace had been two peas in a pod, until that night with Brian had ruined her life and ended his. Chapter 3. She had spent days in her room after Brian's death. When she was finally able to leave her bed and take a shower without breaking down, her parents had told her it was time to have a talk about growing up. She had thought it ludicrous under the circumstances, and pushed them off again and again, until they cornered her in her room 2 weeks later, as she packed for college. She'd gotten accepted early, and, like it or not, the summer session was about to start. It turned out that Ainsley's family had a very different version of the talk. "Mom, Dad, you missed the boat. We already talked about the birds and the bees in health class." Ainsley neatly folded a skirt in plastic and placed it in the blue suitcase they'd bought for her. "I was thinking more about the wolves," her dad said. Ainsley froze, thinking of the growl she'd heard in the woods with Brian right before. "Ainsley, we knew we needed to have this talk with you before you went away, but we hoped you could have a little more time to enjoy your childhood. Most wolf cubs don't turn until they're in their 20s, her dad said. And we weren't even sure if... A look from Ainsley's mom made him reconsider finishing his sentence. Cubs? Ainsley swallowed and smoothed her hair behind her ears, a nervous habit. She began rolling another skirt. I know you're still hurting, honey, her mom whispered and reached to touch Ainsley's face. Ainsley cringed. The hurt look in her mother's eyes would be with her for a lifetime. Her mom withdrew her hand. No matter how you feel right now, it's important for you to learn as much as you can about being a wolf. It is who you are, and you're going to need to know what to do, she said. A wolf. There it was. Ainsley had always known she was different. She just didn't realize how different until that day in the woods. The day she had transformed into some kind of monster and killed poor, innocent Brian Swinton. Of course, she didn't actually remember that part. She had blacked out, mercifully. But Sheriff Warren said it looked like Brian had been mauled by a bear. It didn't take a rocket scientist. The realization of what she'd done hit her like a kick in the chest. Not to mention that you're very important to the pack, her father added. Her mother shot him that look again, like he'd said too much. Ainsley seized the opportunity. How am I important? Ainsley, our family has been a part of this pack for generations, her mother explained. Your grandfather led the pack as alpha, and now your father has that role. A lot of changes are coming to this town, Ainsley, Dad said, and we will need strong leadership to survive. Ainsley stared at her father in wonder. Is that why everyone in town is so friendly to you? I suspect it has more to do with my effervescent charm, but being the alpha doesn't hurt. Ainsley ignored his attempt at humor. Are they all werewolves? Not all of them, but yes, a lot of the people here are wolves. We don't use the term werewolf. It's a little offensive. Even monsters had to be politically correct, it seemed. And you are the leader of the pack? She asked. That makes it sound like the old Shangri-La song, but yes, I am the alpha. Ainsley thought about it. Her quiet father was always at the center of every party. Their friends came to him for advice. Underneath the old tweed blazers, his body was strong and warm. He could still sweep her up and throw her over his shoulder as a teenager as easily as when she was a little girl. His vision was excellent in spite of the decades in front of a computer, or with his nose buried in an old tome. And even the soft voice he used now vibrated with strength. She had never really thought about it. He was her father. He would always be big and strong and brave in her eyes, and she would always want to obey him and make him proud. There was nothing crude and animalistic in that. Was there? I believe you, Dad, and I need to leave. I can't be part of this. What happened was unforgivable. It's tragic what happened to Brian, honey, her mother said. Ainsley could tell she wanted to say more. He's not the last boy in Tarker's Hollow, Ainsley, her father said. Another wolf would be the best choice. Until now, I've held them back. Now that you know the truth, that can change. Ainsley had sudden insight into why the other boys had been so weird. Lately, she'd begun to actually feel the hungry stares she thought she'd been glimpsing for years, and hear the hearts pounding. When she turned around, they always cast down their eyes. She thought that was just how boys were, cowardly. Until the new boy had met her eye and gulped when she looked his way. Her heart turned to ice at the thought. The absolute last thing on this earth I want to date is another wolf. It's bad enough I can't get out of this. She paused. Wait, is there any way for me to get out of this? No, Ainsley, her father said. No, there isn't. So no matter what, I'm going to turn into a gigantic wolf. Yes. Did I turn into a wolf because I was making out with Brian? No, her mother said. Although that sort of activity can draw your wolf to the surface. Your cycle as a wolf has to do with the cycle of the moon. Do I have to turn? Ainsley asked. What if I don't want to? Ainsley shot her a pleading look. Her mom had always been able to make things right. Ainsley wished more than anything that she could go back to being that little girl with the pigtails and the skinned knees, running to her mom for a bandage and a glass of homemade lemonade. To go back to a simpler time, before all this mess. Her mother sighed. You can't change who you are, Ainsley, and turning is part of who you are now. There are stories, her father said, slipping into the academic tone he used with his students. Of wolves that were under duress and couldn't turn. They say the pain was excruciating, both mentally and physically. Michael, her mother shook her head at him. So it can be done, Ainsley said, latching on to the possibility of a normal life. It may be technically possible to withhold from turning, Ainsley, but I would advise against it, her father said. The amount of self-control it would take would be monumental. Your mind and body will be consumed with your new life at every moon cycle. You should engage with it, master it, and enjoy it. It is who you are. You can't just run away. Watch me, Ainsley said firmly. The teeth of the zipper came together with a satisfying hiss, and she swung the suitcase off the bed. She was going away to college. She had a full scholarship to Columbia, and there was nothing they could do to stop her. You're coming home 2 days before the full moon. Her father's tone made it clear that it wasn't a request. Yes, Dad. Of course she didn't. She hadn't set foot in the house since, until the car accident had claimed her parents' lives and forced her back into town. Her parents had hidden the truth from her just long enough to make her a murderer, and now their degenerate lifestyle meant that Ainsley couldn't just hire an army of ladies armed with boxes and stickers to empty the house. Instead, she had to put her life on hold and risk damaging her career to go through their belongings herself and annihilate any trace of what her parents had been. Chapter 4. Ainsley realized that her cup was empty and she was drifting again, losing herself in memories of a past she'd tried to forget. She got up quickly, washed her mug, dried it and put it away. When she was satisfied that the kitchen was as tidy as when she'd come down, she headed back through the dining room and parlor to the stairs. As soon as Ainsley found herself back between the sheets, all her drowsiness was gone. She stared at the stick-on stars glowing on her ceiling, waiting for sleep to come. At some point, she must have drifted off. Chapter 5. The next morning, Ainsley woke early to finish sorting the pile of papers on the dining room table. She sat at the table sipping a mug of hot English breakfast tea. She couldn't bring herself to make coffee using the Keurig that perched on the kitchen counter. Those little pods seemed insulting, to her and to the coffee. She set aside any invoices and receipts related to her mother's hardware store. Those would be for the estate attorney to worry about. There didn't seem to be any references to werewolves so far. Ainsley knew that sooner or later there would be nothing else that needed sorting downstairs, and she would have no choice but to tackle her father's study. The prospect both excited and depressed her. Michael Connor had a perfectly wonderful book collection. Its volumes included all the classics of Russian literature, from Tolstoy to Turgenev. He had them all. In most cases, he had multiple copies. There were dog-eared paperbacks with copious notes in his careful handwriting. Those had sentimental value and would find their way onto Ainsley's own shelves. There were also hardbacked volumes in shining leather and in paper jackets, some in the original Russian, some translations. Some were gifts from her father's students and colleagues. A few were even yard sale finds, which he bought and gave away if he found the translation acceptable. And then there were the rare gems. A few of them she would recognize on sight, because she had been with him when he bought them. Each was worth thousands, or even tens of thousands. Michael Connor hadn't believed in locking away rare books. They lived among the rest of his collection. Ainsley recalled the way he used to pull out a volume to pore over it, noting slight differences in the translation. She had even seen him caress their spines in passing, with an unconscious tenderness, the way he had sometimes tousled her hair when she was little. Unless he had made an inventory that she hadn't found yet, Ainsley had no idea which books ought to go to the library sale and which should be sold at auction. Although she knew she ought to ship them all off to a book dealer, it felt wrong to send them away. She wished that she had someone more versed in rare books to help her with the job. Ainsley stretched her arms over her head. It was impossible to keep working. She needed a walk and to open up a conversation with a local real estate agent. She was going to have to leave the house. Maybe she would even reward herself with a cup of coffee on the way. Tarker's Hollow had avoided the Starbucks revolution, which was a shame. Ainsley imagined the jolt of a hot Pike's Place with soy as it warmed her chest and belly and brought her to life. Surely there was still a place to get a half-decent cup in town somewhere. She pulled off her t-shirt and yoga pants and slipped on a sheath dress and a pair of heels. She even remembered to grab a pair of big sunglasses, hoping to preserve her anonymity. Chapter 6. The walk to town was short but beautiful. Tarker's Hollow had a shade tree committee dedicated to maintaining the glorious canopy of maples and oaks that met over the streets, dappling the old sandstone sidewalks with soft green shadows. Each house she passed belonged to a character from her youth. Sadie Epstein Walker squatted in her garden across the street, big floppy hat and sunglasses in place, harvesting late summer roses just like she had when Ainsley was in high school. Was she a wolf? Ainsley studied her back, trying to decide. When Sadie turned, Ainsley shifted her gaze straight ahead and sped up her walk. A few houses down, Mrs. Hooper's bicycle still sat on her front porch, even though Mrs. Hooper must be 70 by now. As she turned the corner onto Elm, she could hear a few cars a block away on Yale Avenue. All the streets in town bore the names of either trees or colleges. There was a gorgeous garden in front of the post office, and even in late summer, plenty of flowers were in bloom. She turned the corner onto Yale and passed the flower shop, the toy store, and some new place that sold eco-friendly home decor. Then there it was, the hardware store. There was a lump in her throat when she saw the old sign was still in place. Selling her mother's family store had been really hard for Ainsley. She remembered how her high school history teacher, Mr. McGregor, had approached her at the funeral. "Ainsley, please come home," he said simply, hands pressed against his sides. His blonde hair was still a little long. All the girls at Tarker's High when Ainsley had been there mooned over him. "Mr. McGregor, thank you for coming. Can we please talk after the service? There's so much I need to tell you." Ainsley squirmed. "I've really got to get back to New York. I'd like to buy the hardware store. Can we at least talk about that?" Ainsley had resisted the instinct to snarl at him. Why did she feel so protective of the old place? Of course she wasn't going to come home to Tarker's Hollow and run a hardware store. Something had to be done about the business and the building. She agreed to meet him after the service. McGregor, it turned out, was the beta of the Tarker's Hollow wolves. He perched on the edge of her father's brown leather Chesterfield with his hands clasped in front of him. "Ainsley, a beta can't lead a pack forever," he said. "It's complicated, and the wolves are patient, but something's going to give way soon. We need an alpha." Ainsley shifted uncomfortably and recrossed her legs. His heart pounded in response, and she froze. "I'm sorry, Ainsley. I know this isn't the world you chose, but we are your people, and we need your help." "Why don't you just choose an alpha?" "That's not the way it works. Lineage is important." He twisted in his seat. "You need to choose." "Fine, I choose you," she said immediately. "Does that fix everything?" He swallowed. "Do you know what it means for you to choose?" You become alpha, right?" "The only way for an alpha to emerge is for you to choose a mate." Oh, Jesus. She studied the face of the teacher she'd fantasized about in high school. He was gazing miserably at her and sweating a little. The scent of his growling arousal was overpowering. A soft, golden haze formed around him. The creases at the corner of his eyes disappeared and his shoulders broadened. What the hell was going on? "So, if we just..." she whispered. His eyes widened, and he leaned toward her hungrily. The thundering of his heart vibrated through her whole body as her own pulse struggled to match its rhythm. His face had gone from mildly attractive to dazzlingly handsome. He looked like a young god. The air seemed to crackle with energy, and she moved to bridge the distance between them. At the last second, he pulled back with obvious effort and sighed, looking away from her. We don't just have to couple. Choosing a mate means choosing a mate. It's for life. Ainsley shook her head, and the haze disappeared. The room returned to normal. Mr. McGregor looked just as he always had, handsome in a rumpled way. She had only been home 3 days for the funeral, and already strange things were happening. She couldn't wait to get back to New York. Sorry, Mr. McGregor, she said. I'm not interested in choosing a mate. I know you're not, and even if you were, I shouldn't be on your list. He smiled ruefully. There are several promising candidates, and one in particular your parents hoped you would choose. Her parents had a mate in mind for her? Lovely. Okay, I'll bite. Who's the lucky guy? Eric Jensen. Ainsley swallowed. The thought of Eric Jensen always made her feel a twinge of regret. Eric had been her best childhood friend. When the boys in school decided that girls were dumb and couldn't play in the woods, Eric had stubbornly insisted that Ainsley Connor was super neat and that they would kick her out over his dead body. He'd won out over the other kids, and Ainsley was allowed to keep her place by his side. By 3rd grade, they had ruled the woods and creek and even built a massive tree fort, just the two of them. But when the school labeled Ainsley as gifted, she had been pulled out of their shared classes. The extra homework cut into her playtime, and she found herself spending more time with Grace Kwan Cortez and her studious, less outdoorsy crowd. She never exactly had a falling out with Eric, but by middle school, Ainsley realized that not only did she not hang out with him anymore, he wouldn't even look at her when they passed in the halls. By high school, he was really handsome. His strong jaw contrasted with soft, dark eyes that were framed with long lashes. His hair was so dark it was almost black. He wore a black leather jacket that Ainsley secretly thought was pretty cool. Although he had bad boy good looks and excelled at sports, it was common knowledge that he was a nice person. He even headed up a group of boys who would shovel out the senior citizens around the town in the frequent winter storms. Realizing now that Eric Jensen was the man her parents wanted for her gave Ainsley a pang of longing. At 10 years old, Eric had shown her more respect and kindness than any man she'd ever met. And like every other person of importance in her life, she'd dropped him like a hot potato. Ainsley realized Mr. McGregor was waiting for her to respond. Wow, Eric Jensen, she said. That's who your father told me he hoped you would choose. That was a long time ago, but I know he didn't say it lightly. Well, I appreciate the insight, but I'm not going to be choosing a mate. I'm sure you guys can vote or something. Can we take care of the paperwork for the hardware store? Chapter 7. Ainsley shook herself out of her reverie and continued her walk. She didn't have time to reminisce. No good would come of that. Mr. McGregor had kept up her mom's tradition of putting out some seasonal items on tables out front with silly signs reminding everyone why they needed them. There was a collection of rakes and paper leaf bags laid out with the sign, "You'll be raking in the compliments with your beautiful fall lawn." McGregor clearly did not have her mother's wit, but she was glad he tried. She caught a glimpse of him grinding a key for Patty Lovelace, one of the local real estate agents. That reminded her that she had better stop by and talk to Charlie about the house. In her periphery, she could sense them turning toward her as soon as she shifted her gaze. Ainsley wasn't about to risk getting pulled into a conversation. She looked both ways and crossed Yale. There was nothing over there except the empty construction site. No one to bother her. The construction vehicle seemed out of place, especially for a town that feared change as much as Tarker's Hollow. The former ball field was going to be an inn and a restaurant soon. The town had approved it 15 years ago, but they were only just now breaking ground because there had been such a fuss. As Ainsley crossed Yale, she studied the temporary fencing, trying to picture the size of the building and the parking area that would be there one day. Many of the trophies that still lined the shelves of her room featured miniature golden softball players. Ainsley had thrown her share of strikeouts on the field that had already been erased by the heavy treads of the earth movers. Just as she arrived on the sidewalk of the college side of Yale, a figure appeared behind the fence in the construction area. Tall, dark, and handsome didn't begin to describe him, but Ainsley was never the kind of girl who fantasized about Neanderthal types, so she tore her eyes away from his tantalizing shape and headed to the overpass. She would just walk back over Yale to the cafe and the real estate office. "Hi!" She turned. The guy was yelling at her. She expected that kind of behavior on the streets of Manhattan, but here, did construction workers actually think girls liked that? She turned up her nose and sped up her walk. "Ainsley!" he called. She turned on her heel and squinted at him. Did she know this person? She didn't think so. She would have remembered a body like that. "Ainsley Connor, I did not know you were in town." Well, she wasn't going to get out of this. She swallowed a sigh and walked toward him. God, he was good-looking. A white t-shirt stretched over his broad chest. His arms rippled with muscles. Faded jeans hung low on his hips. Why were these blue-collar types always so hot? It wasn't fair. "Do I know you?" "It's Eric Jensen." His eyes crinkled in a smile. He had the longest eyelashes. That was the only part of him she recognized. "Eric?" Ainsley did not remember that incredible body. "Yeah, I almost didn't recognize you either, Ainsley. We grew up, didn't we?" Yes. Eric had grown into an underwear model. Ainsley had just grown curvier than she wanted to. But she couldn't help smiling. "We did," she said. "I was really sad to hear about your parents." He glanced down and kicked at some dirt with the toe of his work boot. "Sorry, I was out of state for the funeral, or else It's okay," she said, letting him off the hook. "I'm dealing with it." "So you live in New York, right?" "Yes, I'm in real estate. It's going well." She left it at that. He was still stuck in Tarker's Hollow, and digging holes for a living. How awkward. It would be better to not make a big deal of her success. "How are things with you?" "They're great, thanks for asking. I just found out I'm on the short list for the highway." What could that possibly mean? Was he on cleanup duty as some sort of community service? "I'm not sure I know what you mean." "Sorry, Ainsley, I guess our small-town news doesn't make it into the New York Times." He flashed her a playful smile that made her forget how to breathe for a minute. "I own this excavation company. We're working on the Inn project now, and it sounds like we're on the short list to do the excavation for the new highway coming in. It's a huge opportunity." The highway? Was that really going to happen? She knew the residents had been fighting it for years, but the highway would finally put the town on the map. Although, given the special kind of diversity found in Tarker's Hollow, maybe that wasn't such a good thing. Ainsley's cheeks flushed at her assumption that Eric was a bog-standard construction type. His ambitions had clearly brought him well beyond the role of ditch digger. It dawned on her that Eric was a wolf, too. She remembered what Mr. McGregor had told her. Her cheeks flushed even more. She must look like a fool. "Oh, wow, Eric, that's amazing. I'm really happy for you." He smiled and looked down modestly, showing off those eyelashes again. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to be his mate. She let her eyes run down the length of his body, wide shoulders forming a triangle with his narrow waist. His jeans hung just low enough that she couldn't quite see but could well imagine the silken trail leading down to what just had to be a beautiful cock. Even the jeans couldn't disguise the size of the bulge between his legs. Plus, he was a wolf. No need to worry about losing control and hurting him. Eric looked like the type that could take care of himself. He looked up, and she met his eyes. In a heartbeat, the edge of her vision blurred, and nothing mattered but Eric. His eyes were luminous. His sweat was an intoxicating musk. His too long hair lifted an imaginary breeze as his heartbeat strained to match hers. Tiny golden notes danced along his muscular body. It was happening again. just like with McGregor, only this wasn't a middle-aged history teacher standing on the other side of the fence. Ainsley licked her lips and moved toward him. Her palms clinked against the chain-link fence, just as he crashed into it, clenching the metal in his powerful hands and twisting until several of the links gave way with a pop. God, he was so strong. She had a vision of him tearing down the entire section of the fence just to get to her. A tiny moan escaped her lips as he growled softly in return, his dark eyes flashing a spectacular amber. His wolf must be close to the surface. She could feel her own, begging to be unleashed. Somehow she tore her eyes from his, and the spell was broken. Chapter 8. Eric cursed softly to himself. He had almost lost control, in front of everyone. He hadn't felt so reckless since he first learned to shift. His father was ex-military. Eric had grown up valuing the benefits of self-discipline. On the other side of the fence, Ainsley panted and held her head in her hands. "Wow," Eric said. "I didn't think that was real." "What was real?" Ainsley asked, regaining her composure. "The drawing of the alpha." He could tell from her befuddled look that she had no idea what he was talking about. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen Ainsley Connor confused about anything. "Did you think about mating with me?" Her cheeks began to flush again. "It's okay, I thought about it too." He smiled but didn't make eye contact. He didn't want her to feel too embarrassed about it. "Yes, Eric, I'm an adult and have had those thoughts casually about plenty of men." She was trying to sound cool and composed, but her racing heartbeat betrayed her. Ainsley obviously wasn't used to dealing with wolves. When your senses were this sharp, there wasn't much use in putting on airs. Most wolves were pretty straightforward as a result. "Wow, plenty, huh?" "Well, enough men." A hint of a smile danced around the corner of her mouth. "Did something crazy really just happen then? Because of who I am?" "Yes, I always wondered if that part was fairy tale. I guess not." He scaled the fence and landed next to her in a fluid motion. Her closeness was almost intoxicating, and he could feel heat radiating from her in waves. He had to try very, very hard not to think about mating, not to think about her clawing her fingernails down his chest as he licked the spot where her neck met her collarbone. He could tell she was having the same problem. "Let's not go down that road again," he teased, letting out a long breath. "So what's the drawing of the alpha?" she asked. "A wolf can't become alpha without a mate. There's no room for lone wolves as pack leaders. All wolves have the potential to be an alpha, but most never get a glimpse of it. You are the rightful heir, so when you looked into my eyes and thought about mating with me, it brought out my inner alpha. It was crazy. Did you really see a halo around me?" She studied him for a moment, as though she were trying to tell if he was joking at her expense. Couldn't she hear his pulse or smell him at all? Ainsley was not a very good wolf, but he supposed that was hardly her fault. "Yes," she said. "There was light all around you, and your hair was moving, and your eyes were—" "It's funny, there was light around you, too. You looked like an angel," he mused. "I guess they don't really talk about that part." "So if I were to, choose you, you would become the alpha?" "It's not that simple. It has to be real, Ainsley. You have to love me. Or whoever," he added, looking away again. Eric wondered how any small-town wolf from Tarker's Hollow was ever going to convince Ainsley Connor to fall in love. He remembered her stubborn determination, even as a child. The pack might be in more trouble than anyone suspected. He wished Ainsley's dad were still around. Michael Connor would know how to handle all of this. He always did. They stood in silence for a moment. "I guess I should go. I need coffee, and I have to see Charlie about getting the house on the market." She let out a sigh that would have escaped normal ears. "You must miss your dad so much." The words were out before he had a chance to think. He could tell Ainsley wasn't as okay with everything as she pretended to be. Tears welled in her beautiful eyes. What an asshole. "It's just, I know it's tough. He tried to recover. My parents have been gone for a few years now, and... Oh, Eric! A shocked look crossed Ainsley's face. I had no idea. I'm... to Florida. He cut her off. Could he possibly mess up this conversation anymore? My parents moved to Florida when my dad's military pension kicked in, and I had to deal with clearing out their old place. Oh, I thought you meant... They stared in awkward silence for a moment, Eric unsure what to say next. Then Ainsley laughed. It was a full, throaty laugh that made him think of church bells, and Eric thought he might do anything in the world to hear that sound again. Can I walk you over? Eric asked, feeling relieved. Ainsley shook her head. No, thanks, I'm fine. They both smiled. He wanted to hug her, but it felt too intimate, and she probably didn't want his sweat and dirt all over her dress. Listen, Eric said, I don't want to offend you, but are you staying in the house alone? Yes. Ainsley, everyone in town knows who you are. You might get unwanted visitors. You think there's anyone who wants to be an alpha so much they would tie me up and tell me to think about mating? I think there are plenty of men who would try to convince you in a nicer way. He bristled at the idea of the other young wolves in town, and what they might do to try to work their way into Ainsley's good graces. The thought made him want to punch someone. Why? He had no claim to Ainsley. Why did seeing her again after all these years make him feel like this? Most likely it was an after effect of what had happened, or almost happened, between them a few minutes ago. But Eric thought it might be something more than that. He sensed Ainsley stiffen at his words. Whatever it was, she felt it too, and she obviously didn't like it for some reason. Well, unfortunately, my parents are dead and I'm not married or anything, so I'm going to be all by myself in the house until it's empty. Don't worry, it won't be long, she said sharply, then stormed away. Chapter 9. Ainsley felt Eric's eyes on her as she marched away. Who did he think he was, anyway? Treating her like she was some little girl, all alone in Mommy and Daddy's house, in need of protection. Ainsley Connor was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. She certainly wasn't about to start taking life advice from someone who howled at the moon in his spare time. Still, Ainsley thought about Eric's wide shoulders, straining the seams of his t-shirt. She fought the temptation to turn around for another look. By the time she got across the overpass, her head had cleared a little. Eric was a total hunk, but at the end of the day, he was not really her cup of tea. Her parents had been wrong. She passed the bookstore and the yoga studio and saw that the storefront next to the train station had changed hands again. Its awkward triangular shape had hosted an endless parade of boulangeries, cheese shops, and frozen yogurt parlors. It looked like it was now an independent coffee shop. That was promising. She glanced at the sign. Edible Complex. Hopefully their coffee was better than their sense of humor. Ainsley decided to risk a cup, and maybe just a little something sweet to go with it. She pushed open the door to a wave of cool air, rich with the scent of fresh coffee. Her shoulders went down an inch in relief. A chalkboard by the counter listed the coffee choices. The pastry flavors were labeled with a wax pencil on the glass of the case. Pretty decent spread. The boy at the counter swallowed when he saw her. Hi, what can I get for you? He didn't look familiar, but he was pulling that thing where he stared while she looked at the menu and then looked away when she turned to make eye contact again. Stupid Tarker's Hollow. Soy latte, please. She turned to look around while he steamed the milk. The dim room was filled with small wooden tables and sofas. It seemed to be a popular spot for college students, a relief since they were mostly passing through, not wolves in residence. A table of kids with blue and purple hair sipped tea and fussed with their laptops. An awkward couple on a vintage sofa pretended to look at their iPads while it was clear each wished it was a regular date, not a homework date. At the table by the window, a man read a book. A real book, not some electronic device. Ainsley squinted to see what it was, but the angle was wrong. The man holding it was hot, though. No, that wasn't quite right. He was handsome. He was too refined to be described as hot. He was just Ainsley's type. Soy latte, the kid called out, as though she weren't the only one standing at the counter. Anything else? No, thank you. Ainsley's mood for a treat was ruined. She wouldn't want the man with the book to think she was the type of person who ate pastries in the middle of the day for no reason, even if she was never going to see him again. She used a napkin to wipe the stray drips from the sides of the cup, then headed toward the window. If she could just grab a seat close to the book guy, she'd be able to see what he was reading. She wiped down a table catty-corner to his and took a seat. The heavy oak chair clattered on the pine floor as she pulled it out, causing him to glance in her direction. Bright blue eyes in a finely chiseled face, crisp white tailored shirt, and longish blonde hair that was too well styled to be cut anywhere in Tarker's Hollow. She surveyed his table. It was free of crumbs and occupied by a paper coffee cup and a tattered copy of War and Peace. She checked his hands. No ring, manicured nails. An understated Breitling watch peeked out from his shirt cuff, trying not too hard to draw attention. Her eyes were drawn back to War and Peace in wonder. Have you read it? His eyes crinkled when he smiled. Of course she had. She read it every fall. It was her dad's favorite, and eventually hers as well, though she'd gone through a rebellious Dostoevsky phase. It's my favorite book. That didn't sound too desperate. Join me, he said, if the table seems clean enough. She studied him again. He was certainly not from Tarker's Hollow. He raised an eyebrow and her stomach did a little flip-flop. She grabbed her clutch and her latte and stepped to the table. He stood up immediately and pulled out her chair. She couldn't decide if the gesture was sincere or ironic, and frankly didn't know which she would have preferred. So, what brings you to Tarker's Hollow? It sounded like he was going through niceties by rote. I could ask you the same, she said. A local, eh? I've been here 6 months and I haven't seen you. I would remember. I was born here, grew up here, went away to college, then got a job in New York, and now I'm back here to close out my parents' estate. An economical biography. It's nice to meet a fellow New Yorker, he said. You're from New York? Not originally, no, but I teach Russian Lit at NYU. I'm at Tarker's Hollow College on sabbatical, and doing a few lectures here and there to earn my keep. Ainsley pursed her lips. What's wrong? He asked. My dad was the chair of the Russian Lit department at Tarker's Hollow. His eyebrows lifted. Michael Connor. He was a legend in the field, he said. He was the whole reason I came to study here. You probably know more about this book than I do. I'm Julian Maggie. Ainsley smiled. It was gratifying to think that someone could admire her dad for something other than being the president of the furry monsters. Nice to meet you. She extended her hand. Ainsley Connor. His passing was sad news for us all. He took her hand and looked into her eyes. She was waiting for something weird to happen, for her sentence to heighten, for haze to appear around him, for the roof of the coffee shop to cave in. Nothing. Except for his gorgeous blue eyes, which were doing a very straightforward kind of magic on her, and the corner of his mouth, delicate and sensual, which was curving upward. Julian, the Russian Lit professor from New York. That was more her style. Chapter 10. Eric watched until Ainsley's small form disappeared. When she was gone from his sight, he let out a long breath. Eric had always been popular with human women, who seemed drawn to his latent power. He found them intriguingly delicate, but it was like going through the motions compared to being with a wolf. And, of course, there were plenty of female wolves in his life. As a high-ranking young male, he pretty much had his pick of willing partners in town. There were even interest from nearby packs, looking to forge alliances in these troubling times. But there was no one like Ainsley. She had the charms of a woman and the lure of a wolf, all at the same time. It was an intriguing combination. And they had a history, though you wouldn't have guessed it from the way their conversation began, or the way it ended. He wasn't sure why she was so mad at him, but he was sorry, whatever it was. The sweet smell of her scented lotion still hung in his nose, along with the more alluring musky scent of Ainsley herself. His heart pounded as he remembered how she had drawn his Alpha. Her plump lips had parted, and the air vibrated with his lust. If that fence hadn't been there, he might have taken her before either of them had changed their minds. He imagined what her soft little body might feel like in his arms. He would pin her down and latch onto her neck, burying himself in her exciting smell. Would she submit to him willingly like a human, or would she give him a little fight like a wolf? She was a wolf, after all, even though she pretended not to be. Eric had never seen something so strange. Why would anyone not want to be a wolf? Eric nosed the air, his own wolf searching for a last whiff. With a sigh, he reined himself in. Ainsley was a childhood friend and a pack VIP, and he wasn't the kind of guy to lose his focus, especially over a woman whose job was to choose the next alpha. He wondered idly what it would be like to be the alpha. The business was really taking off and work required most of his time. Eric knew he should hire a site manager, but he liked to be on the job himself, making sure the work was done to his standards. Plus, his wolf felt happiest outside in the fresh air. He would never have enough time to devote to pack business. On the other hand, having a hand in the inn and highway, he was in a unique position to help the town through some complicated transitions. They were set in their ways, but he knew the changes could be good for them, and they were a smart group. They would understand if he presented it properly. And to do it all with delicious, high-strung Ainsley Connor, warm and waiting in his bed, he would have to be crazy to not find that part appealing. He was sure she would choose an academic like her dad, and that was just fine. But there was no reason he couldn't spend some time with her. They'd been good friends as children, until middle school, when she'd gotten very serious about school and hooked up with Grace Kwan Cortez and the rest of the homework brigade. Ainsley and Eric had been drifting slowly apart when her dad had issued the decree that she was off limits. That sped up the process. Eric hadn't said more than a few words to her since. Until today. She said she wanted coffee. There was no reason he couldn't take his lunch over and join her. They'd have a cup and sort out their misunderstanding. It would be good to catch up, and maybe he could talk to her a little more about the coming changes in town. No matter who she chose as a mate, her opinion about the inn and the highway would be influential. With a spring in his step, he grabbed his messenger bag and called to Carl that he was heading out. His foreman gave a mock salute, and Eric took off at a comfortable jog. A city woman might drink her coffee fast. In moments, he stood in front of Edible Complex. He took a second to run his fingers through his unruly black hair. He'd probably made it worse, but he wasn't supposed to be here to impress her. As he reached for the door, he saw her. She was sitting with a man. He was the opposite of Eric. Slight build, blonde hair, fancy clothes, and a little smirk of a smile. Ainsley was leaning forward in her chair. She was looking at the man like he was wrapped up in a pretty box with a ribbon on top. Eric's chest ached like he had been punched. He spun away from the door before she could see him and picked up his jog. Chapter 11. Ainsley took another sip of her coffee. It wasn't as bad as she had feared. "So how's the estate going?" Julian asked. "It's going fine, slowly. I'm hitting a wall about my dad's books." "What kind of a wall?" He leaned forward with interest. "He collected rare books, but he kept them with the rest of his books. Some of the books I know are valuable, but I'm having a hard time with the rest. I hate to ship them out and trust it to a book dealer, but I guess I'll have to." "Rare books are a hobby of mine. I would be happy to lend a hand." "Really?" "It would be my pleasure. When can I stop by?" "Today?" Julian laughed at her eagerness. I'm giving a talk at the college tonight, which I'm supposed to be preparing for now. He smiled at her conspiratorially. Oh, I see. Say, why don't you come to the talk this evening? It's open to the public, but I'm told that very few people ever attend. I'll see how the day goes. I have so much to do, she said lightly, knowing she needed to spend her time getting the house ready, but wishing she could spend more time with this man who seemed to share her interests. His hand shot out across the table to grasp her wrists. You'll come. Give me your phone. Ainsley was surprised to find herself slipping her phone out of her bag and handing it over. She immediately experienced the usual dread that overcame her whenever she let the phone out of her possession. But she played it as cool as she could and studied his smooth expression instead of craning her neck to see what he was doing. The talk is in your calendar and my number is in your contacts, he said, handing it back. Then I guess I'll see you tonight, Ainsley said, gathering her latte in clutch. It's a date. Ainsley stifled a grin and fled the coffee shop. Outside, the afternoon sun shone overhead, and it took a minute to adjust to the glare and the hot, thick air. Did that just happen? Had she really met someone interesting in Tarker's Hollow? As the sun warmed her hair and her shoulders, she allowed herself to picture him without the beautiful white shirt. How did a college professor have the money to dress like that anyway? Maybe he had family money. It had been a long time, maybe forever, since she'd had a thought about a guy in such an appraising way. He seemed too good to be true, and he was even from New York. Maybe they could see each other after this whole nasty Tarker's Hollow business was behind her. There was something dreadful about taking a risk with someone she might let herself care about. But she certainly didn't want anything to do with the slobbering wolf guys in town. She shivered at the thought of dating a dog of a man who would let himself be changed into a big matted thing every month. Half of them probably had fleas. Julian Maggie was certainly not a wolf. He was different from the one-note New York business types, too. A reader of Russian lit. He was smart and passionate about something she loved. And somehow, although she found him attractive, it wasn't a helpless, crazy attraction like she'd felt for Eric Jensen earlier. Maybe that would help her keep her wolf in check. Plus, he could help her sort through her dad's books. She felt a weight lift from her chest at the mere thought of it. Getting through the books meant getting out of Tarker's Hollow before the full moon. Ainsley considered her options thoughtfully and made the decision to surrender an evening working in the house in order to explore the option of a mutually beneficial relationship with Julian Maggie. Chapter 12. Ainsley was about to pull on her sunglasses when she noticed she had already reached the awning for the local real estate firm, C.M. Coslaw. This whole town seemed so much smaller than when she was a kid. Coslaw was small but very good. They knew the local market inside and out, and the owner, Charlie, who inherited the business from his dad, Charlie, was a kind, honest guy. Their sophisticated black sale signs were synonymous with Tarker's Hollow and the college town sales angle. As usual, they had pictures of a few homes up in the window. She stopped to glance at them. She recognized most of them. The Mongol dwarfs were selling their Victorian. That made sense. They were older and probably getting ready to move to the condos. She did a double take at the price. The Mongolsdorf's house was very similar to the Connors. Was the market here really that low? She shook her head and pushed open the door. Hi, I'm Susan. How can I help you? The desk agent was not someone she recognized. Blonde, petite, big smile. Is Charlie here? Ainsley asked. Sure, he's in the back. Susan enthused and trotted down the hall to find him. Is that Ainsley Connor? Charlie boomed from down the hall. Ainsley smiled and smoothed down her dress. He was headed right for her with that Andy Griffith smile, and she just knew he was going to hug her. You're a sight for sore eyes, little lady, he thundered, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. Somehow, he'd instinctively known better than to give her the full bear hug she would have gotten as a girl. Thanks, Charlie, she said, resmoothing her dress. So, you're done with the big city and you're home to beg me for a desk, right? He winked at her. Nope, just wondering what you think the place is worth, she replied and gestured to the window. I see that the Mangelsdorf's place is up, but the price... The recession was hard on us, and the Philadelphia area has always been modestly priced anyway, he explained. I guess the prices look low to you in general, compared to Manhattan, huh? Ainsley pressed her lips and smiled. She couldn't buy a 400-square-foot studio on the Lower East Side for what her parents' beloved 6-bedroom Victorian was worth. She sighed as she thought about the chestnut built-in bookshelves and the wraparound porch overlooking the rhododendrons. Would it be crazy to hold on to it for a summer home? She shook the daydreams out of her head. I'm fine, Charlie. I just want to clean up and move on. Can you swing by in a day or two to take a look at it and give me some advice about paint and floors? Sure. Anything else we can do? Is Franklin still around? I'd love to have him come in and get rid of some of the clothes and books. Franklin Rhyme drove a pickup truck around town picking up junk. He donated what was useful to charities in the city and took the rest to the junkyard. Charlie shook his head sadly. Frankie just retired again. This time it's for real. His wife's made him sell the truck. You should go on neighborly.com. Susan chimed in from behind him. There's a site for Tarker's Hollow. You can sell stuff and give it away. And it's not creepy like Craigslist, because it's only for our town. A troubled look crossed Charlie's face, but it passed quickly as he clapped Ainsley on the shoulder. If you do that, keep in mind that real estate listings on the site are only local also, and once you put a house on there, you take the wind out of our sails for marketing purposes. Oh, he was afraid she would try to sell the house by owner. She'd been around the block enough to know she'd be leaving a ton of money on the table by doing that, and wasting precious time. Don't worry, Charlie, I'm one of your kind, she said, and I'm not a fool. Bring your paperwork, I'll sign when you come. Thank you, Ainsley. I appreciate it. You're a straight shooter, just like your dad. Ainsley walked home, figuring she had enough time to post a few things online before heading out to Julian's talk. Chapter 13. Ainsley set her designer sandals in their travel case, slipped out of the linen shift dress, and hung it on a padded hanger. The yoga pants and Tarker's Hollow Timberwolves t-shirt she'd worn during the morning's work were folded neatly on the bed. She regarded them with a sigh. If she could get another 2 hours of work in, she would reward herself with a steamy bath. She decided to start at the top of the house and work her way down. She knew Charlie would find more value in the house if it looked nice. Professional or not, everyone was affected by tidiness. Her parents weren't slobs, but the house wasn't show-ready, and of course things always got worse before they got better when you tried to empty 30 years of personal effects. She grabbed the radio from the kitchen counter and headed up the stairs. 2 hours later, covered in dust and sweat, Ainsley was ready to surrender. One of the closets had held boxes full of old photos, which she had added to the stack on the dining room table. She'd already brought down 4 bags of clothes for Goodwill and a couple of chairs. The bedroom now had just the right amount of furniture for staging and were free of personal items. Except that, somehow, there was a gigantic dresser, roughly the size of an elephant, which she could not budge to save her life. It looked like the kind of thing her parents would have picked up at a jumble sale, but of course, she couldn't envision anyone actually picking it up. And the idea of getting it down the stairs was terrifying. The plaster lathe in these houses was pretty sturdy, but once you cracked it, the mess was terrific, and you needed someone who knew what they were doing to patch it up. After a cold drink of water, Ainsley stood with her laptop at her counter and pulled up neighborly.com. She chose a username and password, and then posted that she needed help moving and disposing of a gigantic dresser. Hopefully, someone would write back tomorrow. A smile spread across her face as she anticipated how the hot bath was going to feel. She padded into her childhood bedroom and began removing her jewelry. Impulsively, she pulled out her iPhone and looked again at the calendar entry. Scott Hall, 7:15 p.m. Laughing at herself a little, she peeled off the t-shirt and yoga pants and placed them in her old pink hamper. Then she pulled out the band of elastic that held her ponytail in check and let her hair cascade down her back. In high school, she had wanted curls, but nowadays her long straight hair was in fashion. She kept it up for work. There was no place for being a girly girl in the real estate world, not if you wanted to be taken seriously. A chignon and a Victoria's Secret body-minimizing bra helped camouflage her assets enough to let her clients and colleagues focus on her brains. Her parents ran a frugal household. The hardware store made modest profits, and, as with most college faculty, her father's job paid more in prestige than in dollars. But one place her parents splurged was on their bathroom renovation. Her dad had won a Slavic Literature Studies award that came with a cash prize, a rarity. They ripped out the old sticky tiles and rotten subfloor and installed a heated marble floor. The restored clawfoot tub beckoned her. Once the steam started rising from it, she added a dollop of creme brulee honey bath oil. It smelled heavenly. She dipped in a toe and sighed in delight, then eased her whole body in. The tension drained away from her in warm waves. Soon, the dust and sweat of the day was washed away, and she emptied and refilled the tub for a good soak. Her dad was surely rolling over in his grave at the wasted water, but Ainsley figured she had earned it. She closed her eyes, leaned her head back on a towel, and let her mind wander. She thought of Eric, and the way he had almost torn through the chain-link fence to get to her. What would it be like to be with someone without having to worry about losing control? The thought terrified and exhilarated her. Her wolf perked up and a small sigh escaped her lips. But that wasn't her world. It would never work. She needed something more refined. Julian. She imagined his cool blue gaze and raised eyebrow, and her nipples hardened. The water was suddenly too warm. She let her hand slip below the surface of the water to explore her body. Her skin tingled, and her pulse began to race. What was going on with her? Ever since she came back to Tarker's Hollow, it was like her senses had turned up to 11. She usually didn't feel like this until the moon was full. She certainly couldn't show up to Julian's talk in this frame of mind. There was no telling what she would do. She slipped her hand lower, deciding to take the edge off a little. Just then, the doorbell rang. Chapter 14. Ainsley's eyes snapped open. No one had been living in the house for months. Who would stop by? She dried off quickly as the bell rang again, and wrapped her Victoria's Secret white kimono around herself as she ran for the front door. Maybe it was Charlie with the name of the junk man. She opened the door to see two young men leaning on the porch columns. Both were dark-haired, sun-tanned jock types. One wore a red Tarker's College tennis t-shirt. The other was shirtless. Ainsley's eyes followed the trail of his lean, muscular abs to where they disappeared into the waistband of his shorts. "Can I help you?" she asked, holding her robe together at her collarbone. "We read your post on Neighborly, and we thought we could help you out with your dresser," said T-shirt. "Oh, thank you. That was fast. I thought I would get an email or something." "You have to make your email public for that. Your post has showed your user address." No Shirt chimed in. "We can come back at another time if you want," T-shirt offered. Ainsley thought about how little time she had. She also thought about how much she was enjoying the view of these two strapping young men. No, by all means, now is great." She showed them inside. "I'm really sorry it's such a mess in here. My parents passed away in January, and I'm here to clean out the house. But it's harder than I thought it would be." "I'm sorry about your parents," T-shirt said solemnly. "It's okay," Ainsley murmured. T-shirt had his hand on her shoulders in sympathy, but now he was looking at the trail of her wet hair leading down to her cleavage, easily visible in the silky robe. Her nipples were stiff in the cool air conditioning and made little peaks in the fabric as it clung to her hastily dried curves. She knew she smelled like honey. His heartbeat sped up and she could smell him. Fearless arousal. Behind them, No Shirt stirred restlessly, and she caught a whiff of jealousy. "I'm Justin," said No Shirt, trying to win back her gaze. "Will," said T-Shirt. "We're seniors," Justin said. Ainsley smiled at their awkwardness. Had the boys looked like this when she was in college? "Let's run upstairs and you can take a look at the dresser. It looks to me like getting it out of here without smashing it to pieces is impossible, but maybe you'll think of a way." Will was right behind her on the stairs, and she could feel his admiration. When they reached the 3rd floor, Ainsley opened the door to the front bedroom. They all looked at the dresser. "This dresser?" Justin said. "Yes, it's just so big, I don't know what to do with it," Ainsley said playfully, letting the double entendre hang in the air. "I've always been good at squeezing big things into tight places," Justin said, returning her jest like the tennis player his shirt proclaimed him to be. "I've handled bigger," Will said. Ainsley suppressed a laugh, but they were already ignoring her as they got down to business. It was obvious that they were good friends and that they had moved stuff together before. With a lot of nodding and grunting and very little talking, they angled the beastly dresser and headed for the door. "Don't you want to take the drawers out first?" Ainsley interjected, sounding far more like her mother than she would have liked. The boys just laughed. "Nope, this is no problem, miss," Will said. Justin actually winked at her. Down the stairs they went, and it was beginning to look like they were right, and it was no trouble at all, when they turned the corner onto the 2nd floor landing and slammed Justin's hand into the plaster wall. He grimaced, and Will strained and unpinned him. The plaster was pulverized, which meant Justin must be in a lot of pain. They eased the dresser down on the landing. Justin held his hand to his chest. Ainsley hurried over to him, racked with guilt that she had let them move something that obviously ought to have been hacked to pieces with an axe and gone out in the trash. "We need to get ice on that right away," she said. They followed her downstairs obediently. She pulled a tray of ice out of the freezer. Her parents must have been the only people in the state without a working ice maker. She cracked the tray and shook it out into a plastic bowl, grabbed a plastic bag and a towel, and made her way back to the living room. The boys were standing by the sofa, looking at the wound. "I'm so sorry, Justin. Sit down and we'll get some ice on it." He sat on one end of the sofa, and she knelt on the floor in front of him. She knew her kimono was barely covering her assets in the back. She sensed Will move a few steps to get a better viewing angle. "Give me your hand." He offered her the hand right away. They were so quick to comply to her every command. She wondered what else she might tell them to do. "Can you open and close it?" she asked. Justin flexed his fingers. Ainsley took his big hand delicately in her smaller one. She lifted the bag of ice from the bowl, wrapped it in a towel, and ever so gently applied it to his hand. "That feels good." "I'm glad, and I'm so sorry you got hurt trying to help me." "It's okay. We will get that big thing out of your hallway and come back to fix your wall, I promise." "Please don't worry about the wall. Everything's fine. Are you feeling better now?" "Yeah," he said, no longer trying to hide the fact that he was staring straight down her robe. She stood up slowly, letting her breast graze his leg. She heard him swallow. The scent of arousal poured off them both. It was wrong to tease them like this, but she couldn't seem to help herself. "I guess we'd better go. It's a shame about the dresser," Will said. "Really, it's no big deal. The junk man will have to come for other stuff anyway, I'm sure." "No, I mean, we need a dresser. It's a long story, but we had a 3rd roommate for our apartment who bailed on us. Most of the furniture was his." "Do you want to come back another day for it?" Ainsley asked. "Yes," they said in unison. "I see," she said. "Well, it's fine with me if you want to come back for it, but it needs to be this week. Let me give you my number. Next time, maybe text me on your way over." She wrote her name and number neatly on a honeysuckle-scented note card and thrust it in their direction. Will grabbed it before Justin could challenge him. "Thank you, Ainsley. We really appreciate it, and we'll be glad to help you move anything while we're here. Next time we'll be more careful." He grinned, and she couldn't help but grin back. "That's fine," she said lightly, as the two of them stepped onto the porch. "I'm sure two strong young guys like you can help me out with a lot of things. Maybe next time we can just skip the part with the furniture." Ainsley closed the door, leaving them both standing on the porch with their mouths hanging open. She leaned back against the door and covered her mouth with her hands to stifle a laugh. Had she really just said that? What was this town doing to her? She pushed it out of her head and went upstairs again to dress. It was almost time to leave for Julian's talk. Chapter 15. Peeling off her robe, Ainsley contemplated her body in the mirror. She thought idly to herself that she'd been a senior in college herself just a few years ago, but somehow those few years in the adult world had changed her point of view. She gazed at her own naked reflection, trying to see what they saw, instead of the million flaws and imperfections she always inventoried. Deep down, Ainsley loved her body, and all of its soft, sensual curves. She just wasn't sure why anyone else would like it. She certainly didn't look like the women in the magazines and TV, all hard lines and cheekbones. She turned and surveyed the closet. She'd brought so little with her, it would have to be the linen shift again. At least it fit well. Finding nice things that didn't overly accentuate her voluptuous body was annoying, but Ainsley refused to hide in oversized clothing. She slid back into the dress and sandals and applied a little powder and lip gloss. It took restraint not to make up fully, but she wasn't going to work, and she wasn't going to look like she was trying too hard. Satisfied, she grabbed her clutch. Impulsively, she stuffed a mini bag of toiletries in it, just in case. "Don't overthink this, Ainsley," she said to her reflection as she wondered what was happening to her sense of propriety. Although she had her parents' old Volvo station wagon, she decided to walk to the college. The temperature had dropped to a few degrees below sweltering, and the scent of night-blooming jasmine filled the air. Ainsley was normally a very fast walker, but not wanting to sweat it in her dress, she walked slowly and took it all in. The lights were all on at Sadie Epstein Walker's house. Ainsley wondered whether she was having a garden party or if she was just lonesome and wanted the house lit up warmly. The new people down the block were having a deck put on. The men had just added the copper post tops today. It looked nice, even though it was a change. She crossed Yale and passed the construction site where she'd seen Eric earlier. Her heart lurched, and she forced herself to keep up her pace. Soon she found herself at the edge of the college woods and the path to Scott Hall. She stopped under a street light to powder her nose and smooth on a little more lip gloss. Her eyes were sparkling and her cheeks were flushed. The gloss made her lips look almost swollen. She angled her compact to see her breasts straining against the creamy linen of her dress. She hoped Julian wouldn't guess how wanton she felt tonight. All her life she had gotten what she wanted by playing it cool. If she could own the Manhattan luxury real estate market without a famous last name, she could certainly hold the interest of one handsome academic. Without further ado, she smoothed down her skirt, tucked her hair behind her ears, and marched down the path and up a set of wide stone steps. The cool air enveloped her as soon as she entered Scott Hall. Her heels clacked on the marble floor. It was amazing how quickly she could come out of the hot, humid woods and back into crisp civilization. The foyer was mostly empty. A few elderly townies stood by the refreshment table. It was stocked with what she knew to be stale crackers and sparkling apple cider in plastic cups. There was a sign-in sheet on the lectern by the door, so she stopped and printed Ainsley Connor neatly. She had a sudden stab of panic about writing her real name. Then she laughed at herself a little. Eric's earlier warning was pretty silly. Besides, everyone in town pretty much knew who she was anyway. Chapter 16. As if on cue, a great big blonde guy strolled up to her with a big smile on his face. He looked like every popular kid from an 80s movie, but twice the size. "Hey, Ainsley," he boomed. "Clive? You remember me?" He looked triumphant, though Ainsley wondered how even a nerd like herself could be expected to forget the star of the football team. How could I forget? What are you doing here? She wouldn't have pegged Clive for the type to read much Russian lit. Clive's smile turned sheepish. I was sort of hoping to find you. I heard you were in town. When I saw a flyer for this talk, I remembered you always liked this stuff, and I thought I might bump into you here. Ainsley knew she should be annoyed, but she couldn't help smiling back at him. His honesty was disarming. She surveyed his enormous body. He was even bigger than in high school, but somehow he'd found a polo shirt wide enough to encompass his shoulders. She refrained from brushing a cracker crumb off his chest. Why did you want to see me, Clive? His face grew serious, and he took her by the elbow and led her behind a column. Ainsley, we need you, he said simply. This isn't my world, Clive. They're building an inn. They're bringing in a highway. There are going to be more and more people here. This town might change, Clive, but it will be okay. Change isn't always a bad thing. We need real leadership if we want it to be safe. McGregor is a good guy, but he's not an alpha. Things are going to get really bad, Ainsley. What do you suggest? Clive looked nervous. He wiped his big hands on his khakis and took a deep breath. Ainsley, you know I have an easy way with people. If I led the pack, I could make everything right again. I'm not as smart as you are. Maybe I'm not the one you would want to choose as a mate, but I would protect this town. You wouldn't have to get involved at all, and I'd do anything to try and make you happy. Wow, nothing like the direct approach. Ainsley could see how Clive would be a good leader. Although he had been a bit of a bully in elementary school, he was certainly brave and usually honest, and he had obviously grown up to be a more thoughtful person. She knew she was not the mate he would choose either, though the way he was staring at her breasts made her think it wouldn't be such a sacrifice for him. I don't know what to say, Clive. That's so kind of you. But I'm not cut out for this life. Why don't you just ask the pack to vote you as the alpha? Clive sighed and smiled grimly. It doesn't work that way, Ainsley. There was an awkward silence. Well, it is nice to see you again. What are you doing with yourself these days? She asked, trying to steer the conversation in a more friendly direction. I'm the sheriff. Following in your dad's footsteps. That's really nice. How's he doing? He's fine, Clive said abruptly, obviously not in the mood for small talk. Ainsley, if you change your mind, or if you ever just want to talk about it, call me. He pulled a card out of his pocket and thrust it into her hand. I know you don't think of this town as home, but we're your family. There's good people here. We deserve to hold our traditions. Please promise me that you'll at least think about my offer. Ainsley nodded. When he put it that way, she couldn't help feeling kind of selfish. Clive reached out and touched her shoulder. His massive hand made her feel small. It made her wonder about the size of his other parts. She looked away, terrified that she might draw his alpha without meaning to. He pulled back, and she looked up at him carefully. Maybe I'll see you in town. How long are you here? Just long enough to get my parents' house on the market. I'll be sure to patrol, make sure you're okay. Why did everyone seem to think she needed protecting? I'll be fine, Clive, but thank you. The lights blinked, signifying that it was time to go in for the lecture. Clive took a deep breath. Ainsley smiled. You don't have to attend the talk, Clive. I'll see you later. She reached up and pecked his ruddy cheek. Okay, Ainsley. Talk to you soon. He smiled a relieved smile, winked at her, and strode away. She smiled, smoothed her dress over her hips, and tucked her hair behind her ears. She knew her dress wasn't wrinkled, and that her hair looked better when she let it hang loose. But the old, nervous habits were just one more thing Tarker's Hollow seemed to bring out in her. Ainsley joined the other attendees as they shuffled toward the door, their orthopedics scraping, zombie-like, on the polished floor. Chapter 17. Ainsley stepped through into the great hall and grabbed a seat in the front row. It was habit. She'd always seated herself at the front of the class. It helped her avoid distractions, and it was easier to get called on. She realized once she was seated that maybe sitting in the back would have been a smoother move. But changing seats at this point was probably even less cool than sitting up front in the first place. Julian stood at the front of the room, leaning back on the podium and gazing at her impassively. The rest of the attendees shuffled in and eased their way into their seats. Ainsley had fond memories of Scott Hall. Her dad had held his classes here. She remembered curling up under the oversized podium with a book on sick days when her mom had had to man the store. Dad would set her up under there with a big pillow, even a sleeping bag if it was winter. Scott Hall was drafty. She would curl up in the shadows and rest or read a book with a flashlight and listen to her dad talk. Michael Connor was a great talker when it came to literature. He was a showman, really. Sometimes Ainsley thought he saved all his talking for Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, leaving him with no more words when he got home. He would begin the semester with the brothers Karamazov. It had funny parts that drew the students in. He liked to read passages aloud and did all the voices, too. When he read Fyodor Pavlovich's speeches, he would simper in a sly, drunken voice, nothing like his usual boom. Ainsley usually tried to stay hidden, but sometimes she had to peek out and see her father reading Sweet Alyosha or overbearing Madame Khulakov. Ainsley had been proud of her father. She knew that he was very good at making the scruffy college kids pay attention and read their books, and he made them laugh, too. Some of the girls laughed a little too hard and clutched their books against their boobs in a way that made little Ainsley inexplicably angry. But her father just smiled kindly at them and treated all of them the same. It wasn't until she was older that she realized he was one of the most distinguished Russian lit professors in the country. Important contemporary Russian novelists would visit the school, hoping to gain his favor. Her father's opinion of them, whether he chose to publish about them or even just add them to the syllabus, meant something. A brief squeal of feedback from the mic jolted Ainsley back to the present as Carol Lotus from the Russian Lit department stepped forward. "Welcome to our talk on War and Peace with visiting Professor Julian Maggie," Carol said in her quavery voice. "Dr. Maggie has just published a new look at this classic, entitled A Sleight of Hand, The Magic of Tolstoy. He is here today to share his thoughts on an old favorite." Julian stepped forward with a half-smile. "Who here has read the book?" he asked sternly. There was a pause and a rustling as most of them raised their hands. "I see," he nodded. "And who here has read it in the last 20 years? Ainsley glanced around. All the hands went down except hers and Carol's. Julian smiled. "Then let's begin by remembering the story, and all those names." Everyone laughed. Julian began slowly retelling the familiar story. Counts and princesses, Rostovs and Bezuhovs and Bolonskis, wooed and wed and fought and schemed. They made assumptions and learned better. Saw opportunities arise and failed to seize the day, and finally things came together for the worthy, mostly. Ainsley enjoyed his interpretation. It was meant as a summary, but in what he shared and what he left out, she felt that she learned a lot about Julian. And she liked what she learned. He had a dark way about him with his half-smile, but Julian focused on the battle of good and evil, the effect everyday people have on history, and the importance of family in his run-through. Ainsley began to daydream, just a little. Her eyes went to his thin lips and the smooth line of his jaw. He looked like a prince himself. His clear blue eyes caught hers. "Busted." "Miss Connor?" His smile was disarming. "Yes?" "You looked like you wanted to make a point about Count Bezukhov and the peasants." Oh dear, she wasn't going to let him embarrass her, but she was damned if she could think of anything quickly, with him leaning back against the podium in that sexy way. "You know, Dr. Maggie," she said, "I was just thinking maybe Count Bezukhov and the peasants are similar to the problem of modern gender equality and family dynamics. She pulled that out of nowhere. Hopefully, there were no follow-up questions. He raised an eyebrow. Continue. Shit. Well, Pierre built schools for the peasant children and they learned to read and write. Then they had to go back and work on the farms. Pierre expected them to be grateful for the beautiful schools, but they were angry with him instead. This was because knowing how to read and write was of no use to them on the farms and simply made them dissatisfied with their lives. Ainsley paused. She had forgotten how much he loved a good book debate. Julian nodded. 200 years later, women go to school. They spend years studying and pursuing careers, and then most women go on to get married. Women from families who can afford to do so often stay home for a few years with small children. When they are ready to return to the workplace, there aren't opportunities commensurate with their level of education. Those opportunities go to younger workers. They are then faced with being underemployed or continuing on with the role their great-grandmothers had, homemakers. Which begs the question, why all that education? You could hear a pin drop. Ainsley knew her theory had about 1,000 holes in it, plus she was pretty sure it was offensive, though she couldn't decide if it was the women or the peasants who should have been most offended. So you're asking what's the point of having an ability if you don't use it? Julian asked. I guess I am. Although, when he put it that way, it hit a little too close to home. Just as she was about to turn purple and scurry away, Julian began to laugh softly. You're quite the rabble-rouser, Miss Connor, he said. Thank you. She managed to meet his eye. He was smirking again. At least we can conclude that you did read the book. Now everyone laughed. Ainsley smiled down at her lap and smoothed her dress over her thighs. He might have won this round, but only because she hadn't been paying attention. The talk went on for another hour. Julian had a great perspective on the novel. Ainsley found herself hearing new notes on War and Peace she had never heard before. Many of the attendees asked a question here or there, but more and more Ainsley saw that Julian was focusing his thoughts on her, looking to her as he made each point, waiting for her to ask a question or add a thought. It was electrifying to share a room with a man who was smart, cultured, creative, and passionate, and one who knew how to get a shirt to the dry cleaners. Ainsley was overwhelmed at the possibilities. And the way he looked at her was almost unbearable. Her inner wolf stopped pacing behind its bars and lifted its nose to scent the pure excitement wafting off him. They sparred a few times, and he argued eloquently, though once or twice he lost his patience and ran his fingers through his golden hair as she quoted passages to shoot him down. Ainsley knew her stuff, and she wasn't going to pretend she didn't. If he couldn't handle it, she'd rather know now. Oh, but he could handle it. Sometimes he would come back at her with a brilliant point, leaving her with nothing to do but nod. Others he would shake his head and smile admiringly at her, in what she could swear was a pleased way, then raise his hands in concession. At one point in the evening, she heard Carol cough a tiny cough. They stopped their latest argument just as Carol rose and spoke. This was a real treat for all of us tonight. For anyone here who didn't know it already, I'd like to explain that Miss Connor in the front row is the daughter of the late Professor Michael Connor. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I think you'll all agree she is cut from his cloth. I don't know when we've had a more spirited discussion at one of our campus talks. She stopped to smile at Ainsley and then at Julian, who bowed his head in acknowledgement and began to clap his hands. The rest of the crowd joined in. Ainsley blushed and shot him a look that said she would get even with him. At any rate, I know it's getting late, Carol said. Thanks again to Dr. Maggie, and please don't forget to grab a flyer in the lobby about our upcoming series of campus talks. Chapter 18. The audience shuffled toward the exit. Julian leaned forward, and Ainsley's heartbeat sped as she realized he wanted to continue their conversation privately. But before he could take the first step in her direction, Carol Lotus strode over. "Oh, Ainsley," she wavered. "It was just like listening to your father, the way you talk about Tolstoy." "Thank you, Carol," Ainsley said, trying to hide her disappointment at losing her moment alone with Julian. "We all miss him so much." "Tolstoy?" Ainsley asked. Carol looked confused for a moment, then realized Ainsley was making a joke, and managed a weak smile. Ainsley felt a pang of regret for the older woman. She had been close with Ainsley's dad, and was obviously still dealing with the loss. Ainsley was just so tired of going through the same song and dance every time she talked to someone in town. They all knew she hadn't spoken to her parents in years. She hadn't been there near the end, and bringing it up sometimes felt like they were just rubbing salt in the wound. Seeing Carol reminded Ainsley that her parents were important to a lot of people, and many of them had their own reasons to grieve. It wasn't always all about her. Ainsley made a note to not be such an insufferable bitch to people who cared about her. Carol looked around surreptitiously. Ainsley followed her gaze. Julian was thumbing through his notes slowly at the podium, as though he was looking for something. Or maybe he was biding his time, waiting for Ainsley. Her pulse quickened. Carol cleared her throat and continued. "Well, it was a pleasure to see you, Ainsley. You know, I remember when your dad let you nap under that very podium when you had the flu. I gave you my cough drops, and you said they tasted like candy." "Oh, yes. And that little box with the wax paper was so fancy." Ainsley laughed. "Ainsley, we haven't had the time, or, frankly, the heart, to clear out your father's office." She put a hand on Ainsley's arm. "Would you be interested in looking through his things? I know there are some personal items. And maybe you'd like his copies of the classics." There was a lump in Ainsley's throat. Of course, she was overwhelmed with stuff to go through as it was, but the idea of spending time in her dad's beloved office and being allowed to look through his books and notes was comforting. She managed to nod her head. "I'm so glad, dear." Carol patted her firmly on the shoulder. "Let me give you a ride home. My car is right out back, and we can work out getting you a key to your father's office." "Excuse me, Carol," Julian interrupted smoothly. "Miss Connor and I were planning to go for a stroll after the talk. She brought up some ideas for my new book, and I was hoping to hear more." "Oh, dear," Carol exclaimed. "I didn't realize you had plans. Well, of course, Ainsley, we'll find another time to chat and get you a key, dear." "Thank you, Carol," Ainsley said, after throwing a dirty look at Julian behind Carol's back. He just gazed back at her calmly with that insolent half-smile. Carol gave her arm one last squeeze and headed out to the hallway to clear up paper cups and turn out the lights, as she always did after campus talks. Ainsley turned to Julian. "What was that about?" she whispered angrily. He gave her a lazy smile, then closed the distance between them in a long stride. She could feel his breath on her neck and couldn't make herself pull away, even though she thought she should want to. "I'm sorry, Miss Connor," he said in her ear. "Were you hoping to reminisce about cough drops and go moon over your father's books?" Ainsley was speechless. "That's not why you came here, and it's not where you want to go after, is it?" "Go ahead, smooth that skirt down again, and tell me that you want to ride home in Carol Lotus's Volvo." His warm breath on her neck was shattering her concentration. He slid his hand down to the small of her back and led her to the podium. He touched a finger to her chest, just above the cleavage. Her skin tingled in response. "Stay." He gathered his papers and neatly arranged them in his leather briefcase. He turned to her and snapped it shut. "Come on," he said. "Let's go for a walk." Wordlessly, she tucked her hair behind her ear and followed him. Carol waved at them enthusiastically from under the card table, where she was gathering dropped paper cups. "Do you need some help, Carol?" Ainsley asked, almost hopefully. "Not a bit. I'm just about packed up here. You two enjoy your discussion." They continued down the hall toward the gigantic wooden doors. Chapter 19. Ainsley stepped through the door as Julian held it for her politely. A rush of fragrant, humid air met her. They walked together in the moonlight. This was just what Ainsley had wanted, but she hadn't pictured being the one off balance. Julian was clearly in control of the situation, and it was exciting and a little scary at the same time. 3 street lamps winked in the velvety darkness, showing the path through the woods. Little Red Riding Hood went off through the woods to her grandmother's house. Only, who was the wolf in this story? Ainsley almost giggled. Julian's hand slid down between her shoulder blades to the small of her back again, and she inadvertently shivered with pleasure. "Are you cold?" he asked, letting his eyes trail slowly down her body. Ainsley shook her head before she could think the better of it. She was never cold, and that was one of the special things about being a wolf. She always ran hot. Of course, now he knew her shiver was because of his stupid hand. He smiled to himself, and they continued to walk silently. They were nearing the thickest part of the trees. She had a flash from her dream of Brian. These were the same trees. One of them was the one he pinned her against in his passion. Somewhere nearby was where they found his body. She shivered again, this time not from Julian's touch, and pushed the thoughts out of her mind. She had spent a decade trying to forget that day. She was very good at it. Julian began to trace tiny circles on her back with his thumb, drawing her attention back. Around and around, until all she could think of was his touch, and imagine it elsewhere. She stole a glance up at him. His cold blue eyes locked with hers. She willed him to toss his briefcase to the ground, wrap his thin fingers around her shoulders, and pull her in for a kiss. He didn't. Instead, they walked on a few more quiet minutes, his circling thumb creating an agony of anticipation. Ainsley was consoled when her wolf smelled Julian's excitement rise and heard his heartbeat thunder. At least she wasn't the only one feeling this way. They reached the fork between the path in town and the path to the house for visiting professors. She paused, knowing that they should part ways here. Julian moved her firmly toward the path home. "I'm coming home with you," he said, matter-of-factly. Ainsley felt a tiny thrill of victory. It was followed immediately by a stab of panic. The house was a mess of papers, and though it looked better after today's work, she wasn't about to entertain there. Plus, there was something about taking a guy to her parents' home at night. It felt all wrong. She stopped walking. "Julian, I'm sorry, but we just met." "Please," he whispered. "I've never met anyone like you. We're so alike. I know you feel it too." His sudden sincerity was disarming. She looked up at him, and he gazed back with a longing in his eyes that tugged at places inside her. "Who else is staying at their house?" she heard herself ask. "Just me." "Let's go there." An odd look flitted across his face for an instant. Before she could interpret it, he took her hand and marched her down the path to Thayer. She felt like an errant child being dragged out of a store. The idea of it made her want to giggle again. But Julian was so serious, she knew it would only delay their progress, and Ainsley wasn't sure she could handle a delay. They flew up the mossy stone stairs of the old house. The overhang of the cedar shake roof made the stone cottage look like something out of a fairy tale. "My, Grandma, what big eyes you have." As she usually did in intense situations, Ainsley worried a little about holding her wolf. It wasn't the wolf's time, but this place seemed to be goading it, loosing it enough that it could poke out its snout and revel in the wealth of sounds and smells. And Julian was luring it out. It was fascinated with him. more so than anyone else she'd been with. What was so special about him? Chapter 20. Julian rattled the key into the lock and flung open the door. There was a large sitting room encircled by arched leaded glass windows. A low fire crackled in the fireplace. Soft oriental rugs carpeted the floor. Julian dropped his briefcase and shut the door behind them. It was the first time he had broken physical contact with her since they'd left Scott Hall. She stood in front of the fire, suddenly less sure she was making the right decision. When he turned back to her, she felt nervous. He smiled. "Would you like a glass of wine?" She shook her head shyly. He stepped out of his shoes and slipped off his jacket, hanging it neatly on the hook by the door. "A cup of tea?" She shook her head again. He unbuttoned the top button of his shirt and slowly pulled off his tie, hanging it on the hook over his jacket. Ainsley licked her lips and smoothed her dress over her hips. "Then let's get those shoes off," he suggested, gesturing to the inglenook benches on either side of the fireplace. Ainsley perched on one of the benches. Julian knelt at her feet and slipped off one sandal and then the other, his lips turned up in admiration. She wasn't sure if it was because he recognized the expensive shoes or he liked being on his knees between her legs. She hoped it might be both. He placed the sandals carefully under the opposite bench. Most guys would have thought it cool to hurl her shoes across the room in passion, or they might have carelessly put them on the threshold of the fireplace, and she could either ruin the moment by moving them or spend the whole night with a nagging worry that they might end up on fire. Before her nervous brain could find something else to think about, he turned back to her. "Is that better?" he asked. Ainsley nodded. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been so quiet. "Good girl." He reached up and smoothed the fabric down over her thighs with a playful smile. She stared wordlessly at his hands as they gently but firmly caressed her through the thin dress. "So soft," he mused. "No wonder you're constantly smoothing your skirt down. I could do this all night." Waves of longing coursed through Ainsley. She wanted to tangle her fingers in his hair and pull him to her. She wanted to unbutton his shirt and lick his chest. His hands never stopped their slow stroking, but her wolf could hear his pulse hammering, and it pawed at the bars, claws scraping. Ainsley closed her eyes and took a careful breath. "Slow down, be careful. It shouldn't be this hard so soon." The wolf drew back a little. Ainsley opened her eyes. Julian had stopped stroking her thighs and was looking up at her. "What's wrong?" "Wasn't that a terrific question? Gee, Julian, I'm sorry you're making me so hot I can't think straight, but I can't really let go because I might turn into a giant wolf and maul you." "Nothing." "Ainsley, you're a very sexy young woman." His hands went back to her thighs. "And you'll have to forgive me for trying to seduce you. Of course, we don't have to do anything you don't want to do." But as he spoke, he slipped his hands under her dress and firmly pushed it up instead of down. "It's just that you seem to have cast a spell on me, and I'm helpless before you." His hands were on her bare skin now, and he gently pressed her thighs apart. He knelt up and moved between her legs to look right into her eyes. "Now, Ainsley, tell me, do you want to go home?" She licked her lips, and he leaned slowly forward and brushed his own lips against them. The effect was immediate. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she could feel his pulse reverberating through his kiss. She arched her back involuntarily, and he wrapped his arm around her, cradling her as she moaned against his mouth. In one smooth movement, he stood with her in his arms. Then he carried her to the bedroom. He sat her gently on the coverlet at the edge of the bed. He knelt again and turned her slightly, then slowly tugged down the zipper of the back of her dress. She could hear each tooth release. She heard the leaves whisper in the trees in the college woods and felt the warmth of each star in the window from their remote distances. He turned her back to face him, then rolled the straps of her dress down. Dipping his hand into the bodice, he allowed his fingers to caress her cleavage as he eased the dress down just enough to reveal her lacy white push-up bra. His intake of breath and the increase in his heartbeat told her he liked what he saw. "So lovely," he murmured, brushing his lips against the tops of her breasts. Her nipples hardened instantly, and she thrust herself forward. "Greedy little girl," he breathed. "Slow down." But he was already peeling down the cups to nuzzle her nipples. She gasped at the sudden pleasure as he circled one and then the other with his inquisitive tongue. With one hand between her shoulder blades, he pressed her back toward him so that she arched into his mouth. With the other hand held down her leg, his thumb circling maddeningly on her inner thigh. She felt the white-hot pain and pleasure of his teeth against one nipple and stifled a moan. He rewarded her by sucking her deep into his mouth. The taste of her seemed to overwhelm him. His hips jerked against the edge of the bed as he groaned into her breast, then turned to the other. Her hands found their way into his hair at last, and she clutched him to her and felt the delicious suction on her other nipple. Her hips began to buck in spite of her attempts at control, but he pressed her down insistently, and she surrendered with a moan. He pulled back to look at her, and she could see his pupils dilate with desire. She could only imagine what she must look like, all wild hair, swollen lips, and stiff pink nipples pushed up over the bodice of her dress. She didn't care, as long as he would just touch her again. He stood them up, pulled her dress over her head, and folded and placed it on the bedside table. He turned to her, and his eyes hungrily took in her curves. The bra pushed up her exposed breasts. Her lacy white panties were the last bit of covering she had, and he was eyeing them. Ainsley had always been shy about her body, but somehow she didn't care tonight. She could tell by the way he was drinking in the sight of her that Julian was not disappointed. "Beautiful girl." Her whole body responded with a wave of desire. As he took off his breitling and unbuttoned his shirt, her wolf tilted up its head and howled in frustration. Ainsley caught her breath, but managed to stay in the moment. Julian was gorgeous. He had a ballet dancer's physique, thin but powerful and lightly muscled. She stepped toward him, and he froze as she traced her fingers across his chest and nuzzled his tiny nipples. When she caught one in her teeth and caressed the tip with her tongue, he let his head fall backward in pleasure. Then he wrapped a hand in her hair and pulled her away. "Easy," he said, as he unbuckled his belt and let his pants drop to the floor. Then pushed her into the bed on her back. She lay back, praying for control, as her wolf threw itself at the bars, and Julian turned off the overhead light and removed his socks, underwear, and shirt, and placed all his clothing on the chair in the corner. He left on the lamp by the dresser. In the dim backlight, his silhouette looked timeless and youthful. She could see his cheeks swell as he smiled down at her, and she couldn't help smiling back. He fell to the bed, pushing her thighs apart and crawling up between them. He fed on her neck for a moment, then her mouth again, licking and sucking her tongue until she could hardly breathe. His hand found a breast and plumped and kneaded gently. She arched into him, and he let the pad of his thumb graze her nipple. Again her hips bucked against him. She could feel the length of his hard cock against her belly. Her insides clenched pleasurably. He pulled away from her mouth only to descend upon her breasts again. Ainsley bucked her hips against him urgently, growing impatient. He pulled back and smiled. Then he drew a trail of light kisses lower, right to the edge of her lace panties. He slid his hands under her hips and pulled her to his mouth. She could feel his breath through the soft cotton. She was so wet she was sure he could taste her through it. "Oh, my poor darling," he whispered. She bit her lip to stop herself from begging him for satisfaction. He traced one long finger along her center, and she was sure he could feel her open for him. He traced it again and again. She could hardly contain herself. He dropped his head to mouth her through the fabric, and she cried out frantically. He cursed softly, hooked his finger under the lace band, and slid off the last vestige of her clothing. Ainsley lay beneath him, panting. She didn't know what he would do next, and she didn't care, so long as he touched her again right away. Julian didn't disappoint her. He pushed her thighs apart and studied her glistening pussy with ravenous eyes. "All the better to see you with, my dear." One long finger traced a line down her, and she could feel herself swelling and opening. He leaned forward, placed a hand on each thigh, and traced the same line with his tongue. Ainsley lost track of her own sounds. Julian caressed her with his tongue softly and slowly. He moved to her clitoris until her moans grew desperate. Then he abandoned it to slide up and down soothingly. Ainsley tossed her hair against the pillows and tried to lift her hips up to meet his infuriating tongue. Her wolf was slavering and snapping behind the bars. Suddenly she felt one long finger enter her. Her pussy clenched around it convulsively, and she tried to move her hips again for friction. Again, his arm across her hips thwarted her, and she moaned in despair as he eased his finger in and out unhurriedly. "Such a good girl, Ainsley," he cooed approvingly. "Do you want to come for me now?" "Yes." "I think we can arrange that," he whispered. Suddenly his mouth was on her again, suckling and tugging on her clit as his finger hooked a spot inside her she hadn't felt before. The pleasure was blinding. Ainsley's whole body went taut. "Please don't stop, please don't stop, please don't stop." She knew the moment before the orgasm took her that she was coming and nothing could prevent it. As the devastating convulsions wrapped her in their endless embrace, she felt ecstasy and finally a woozy relief. Before the last wave of pleasure had left her, Julian was tracing a path of hot kisses up her chest and taking her mouth in his. She could taste herself on him. Just as she began to explore his mouth, he pushed her legs apart impatiently and nudged the tip of his cock against her drenched opening. She opened her eyes and saw he was looking at her with a desire that was almost pain. She tilted herself up to him, and he eased himself into her with a groan. Once inside her, he held her still for a long moment, then drew himself slowly out. Ainsley cried out at the emptiness, and he growled and pushed in and out of her with hard, fast strokes. Her pussy clamped down on him, and he grit his teeth and rubbed his thumb against her clitoris. Ainsley melted under him immediately again. He seemed to lose his resolve then and pounded into her mercilessly as she finished her second climax. Just as she was coming down, she felt him swell inside her. "Ainsley!" he cried helplessly as he jetted and spurted inside her, grasping her hips and pushing himself in deep. When he was finished, Julian stayed inside her and rolled her over on top of him. "Thank you, Miss Connor," he whispered. "That was almost as good as the Tolstoy debate." She giggled. He stroked her back gently with his fingers. They both sighed. Ainsley wondered how she would get out of the sticky embrace and clean herself up without offending him. Sex was lovely in the moment, but if you thought too much about all the bodily fluids, it was not very nice. "You know," he whispered, "I love cuddling, but I'll be happier when I have fresh linens for you to sleep in, and I'm not so sweaty. Would you mind if I showered?" Ainsley smiled a genuine smile. "Me too," she said. "Meet you back here in 15 minutes? It's a date." She headed up to the second-floor bathroom as he went to the first floor. By the time she was showered and back, he had changed the sheets and had a fresh t-shirt laid out for her, as well as a pair of Calvin Klein boxer briefs. She slipped into them and then into Julian's arms. He wrapped a sheet around them. For a long time, she lay against his chest, listening to his heart beat lazily. She was sure he didn't actually expect her to stay the night. It was time to let him off the hook. Julian, this was lovely, but I should probably head back now. I have a long day tomorrow. I'm sure you do too. She waited for his weak argument, masking a secret relief. She didn't get it. That is a dreadful and unthinkable idea. Ainsley Connor, go to sleep immediately. She was too tired to argue. She fell asleep with his hand softly grazing her back. Her last waking thought was to hope absently that she wouldn't drool on his chest as she slept. Chapter 21. At about 2 a.m., Ainsley woke with her heart pounding. Sometimes this happened. It was her wolf. She had restrained it too much tonight. The wolf always liked to run in the night, and now it was insistent. Ainsley eased herself out of Julian's embrace and pulled a scented note card and pen from her purse. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she wrote neatly. "I'm sure we'll see each other around town sometime. Ainsley Connor." It was a non-committal note, but she didn't want to show her hand too much, and besides, something about all this felt like it was too much, too fast. She slipped out of his t-shirt and shorts and put on her own things. Her poor dress, she was really going to have to go shopping tomorrow. She headed out into the woods at a swift walking pace. By the time she got close to home, she was trotting. Once the wolf got going, it liked a long, loping stride. Ainsley was a little worried about what that might look like if she bumped into anyone in town in the middle of the night. Though what anyone who wasn't a wolf would be doing out at 2 a.m. in Tarker's Hollow, she could not begin to imagine. As she pulled out of the woods behind her parents' house, she immediately sensed that something wasn't right. Then she saw it. The back door of the Connor house was wide open. Ainsley Connor did not leave doors open. A shiver went through her, and her wolf's hackles lifted. She slowed her pace, and her inner wolf pricked up its ears and lifted its nose to the breeze. From inside the house, she heard a tremendous howl. Episode 2. Chapter 1. The back door of the Connor house was wide open. Ainsley Connor did not leave doors open. A shiver went through her, and her wolf's hackles lifted. She slowed her pace, and her inner wolf pricked up its ears and lifted its nose to the breeze. From inside the house, she heard a tremendous howl. Chapter 2. Ainsley sprinted across the open space between the woods and the back of her house, following the sound of the howl. Anger ripped through her body, bringing her wolf dangerously near the surface. Who would dare invade her family home in the middle of the night? The howl told her it must be a wolf. Given their obsession with lineage issues, maybe it was finally time for her to pull rank. Someone was going to be sorry. She bounded up the back steps 2 at a time and burst through the open kitchen door. A familiar smell hit her nostrils as her feet touched the linoleum floor. Before her eyes could adjust to the deeper darkness, she felt the presence of a wolf. She froze in her tracks and let her eyesight shift, the wolf's form taking shape before her. The creature was enormous. Even on all fours, it was almost as tall as she was, and black as night. Heat radiated off its form in waves, along with an ineffable, spicy scent. Behind him, a second wolf, nearly as large, had startled at her entrance. It crouched, just near the floor, silvery paws splayed on the linoleum. The muscles in its legs coiled like steel springs, ready to launch the beast in her direction. Fuck! Ainsley's breath caught in her lungs, her anger giving way to fear. Maybe this was a mistake. She had expected normal, dog-sized wolves. These must be something different. They made the direwolves of Game of Thrones look like lapdogs. She wouldn't get this big if she changed, would she? She locked eyes with the magnificent black wolf. Their amber depths enveloped her. They seemed almost familiar. Who was he? He blinked and stepped toward her. The gorgeous mantle of his ebony fur was almost hypnotic as it shone and winked in the moonlight filtering in the kitchen window. Before he could take a step backward, he began to change. In one fluid motion, his hindquarters dropped, his neck lifted, paws and tail disappeared, and before her stood a man. A naked man. The dim light played off his chiseled body, accentuating the contours of each muscle. Though he was smaller than his wolf, he was enormous. Again, Ainsley's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes moved back to his. Fuck, again. It was Eric. Eric fucking Jensen. Eric fucking Jensen in her house. What the hell, Eric? Ainsley, thank God. He took another step toward her. His expression was awash with relief. Ainsley's whole body shook. Anger at the intrusion was layered with sudden arousal from the sight of his glorious naked form. Her wolf was very close to the surface. Just under her skin, 10,000 cells hummed and prickled dangerously. Eric's eyes went from relieved to hungry in an instant. His lips parted. The golden haze began to form around him. She shook her head and tore her gaze from his to prevent calling his alpha. As she lowered her eyes, they dragged over his stiffening cock, which was pointed at her like an arrow. She didn't know they even made them that big. He lifted his nose in appreciation. Then he recoiled. Are you fucking kidding me? Had he smelled Julian on her? She froze. Ainsley, Jesus, how could you? He sounded utterly betrayed. She couldn't respond. Her head was pounding. Her senses were still filled with his scent and his warmth. You have one responsibility, to mate with a male from the pack. That's it. The whole town is full of good men, men who care about you, and you choose to fuck around with a goddamned human. His words hit her hard. He wrung each one from his mouth bitterly. She bristled. She could understand why he would be upset if she was out chasing a husband, maybe, but she was just a young woman enjoying herself. It was none of his business. Why was he so upset? Oh, God. Was he jealous? She sought his eyes again without thinking, and found them burning in accusation and something else. Eric's closeness and nakedness hit her again. His smell was intoxicating, and he was warm as the sun. His dark, too long hair dripped with sweat. Again, she felt a primal pull, and his skin began to glisten. Not again. Before Ainsley could tear herself away, the silver wolf was between them, and the contact was broken. Eric snarled, but the silver wolf only butted its massive head against his shoulder and continued to pace. Ainsley shook the cobwebs out of her head. Other than breaking into my house and nosing around in my personal life, what do you want? Eric drew in his breath with a hiss. We were out on a night run, just like you. We saw your door open, but there were no fresh tracks or strange scents. We thought something might have happened to you. Oh. Do all wolves run at night? That's the first thing you're worried about? I was never sure why I wanted to run at night. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Ainsley, you really don't know what's going on here, do you? She shook her head. Cressida, check out upstairs, just in case. The silver wolf growled and trotted away. Chapter 3. Ainsley kept her gaze averted. She couldn't afford to take any chances now that their chaperone was gone. It seemed she was developing a hair trigger with this alpha drawing thing. May I? Eric gestured to a box of her father's old jeans on the table, waiting for goodwill. Ainsley nodded and smiled to herself. When she heard the hiss of his zipper, she looked up carefully. The jeans hung low on his hips. Her father's physique had been quite different from Eric's. She tried and failed to ignore his rigid abs, bulging biceps, and the wide planes of his chest. There was something to be said for manual labor. Tea? She asked. Sure. So what's really going on? Please enlighten me. I don't see how an inn and a highway are really going to change the way of life in a town as old as Tarker's Hollow. She busied herself washing out the old copper kettle. Do you know how the pack works? She shook her head and waited for him to get sarcastic. Okay, well, the Alpha is the leader, he began softly. He sorts out minor disagreements within the pack, monitors concealment within the greater community, and plans the future of the pack. More importantly, though, he protects the pack. What do you mean, protects? I mean he protects the pack. He has to be strong enough to fight off any threats. Wow, she tried to picture her dad fighting anything more than a stack of books. There really was a lot about him she never knew. Is that why Mr. McGregor told me he wouldn't be a good alpha? When did he tell you that? Ainsley was instantly embarrassed. When I was home for the funeral, he came over to talk about buying the hardware store. He told me he was the beta and asked me to stay here and choose an alpha. Oh God, she couldn't. What did you say? I told him that I chose him. Eric made a choking sound. Ainsley whipped around to see him hiding a smile under his hand. Did he? Yes, he did, she said crisply, turning on her heel. Eric began to laugh. It was genuine, without malice. Ainsley focused primly on filling the kettle. Then what? He stopped it, thank God. I didn't know what was happening. He told me that I'd have to mate for life for it to work and that my father had someone else in mind for me. Shit. Double shit, triple shit, fuck. Who was that? She couldn't admit that it was him. What kind of tea do you want? Whatever you're having. So, who did your dad want you to choose? Eric, I don't think it matters, seeing as I'm not going to do it. If it doesn't matter, then tell me. Clive Warren, she said before she could stop herself. She turned to see if he would believe her lie. Clive Warren, really? Eric looked disappointed. I guess he's a nice enough guy. He certainly is strong. There was a faraway look in his eye. Ainsley almost felt guilty. Yes, but it doesn't matter how nice he is, because I'm not going to... She forced herself to say it. Mate with him. End of story. She turned and reached for the mugs. He laughed again, and the warmth of it was comforting. Anyway, Ainsley, the beta assists the alpha and also keeps an archive of the pack's history and bloodlines. He's generally not an alpha type. So pick someone else. The alpha's leadership has to be absolute. This isn't like voting for president and choosing someone else in 4 years if you change your mind. The drawing of the alpha is for life, and packs are torn apart if an alpha is displaced. It needs to be done the right way, so that it feels right and smells right and is right. He paused, and she knew there was more. She placed an Earl Grey in each mug and turned to him again. It seems to me that the wolves of Tarker's Hollow are more than capable of making a good decision and sticking with it. There must be something else. Ainsley, you're in real estate. What do you think will happen when the inn comes, and the bookstore, and the highway? She leaned back against the counter, finally in her element. At first, it will be messy, like it is now. Dirt everywhere and neighbors complaining. He nodded. And then? The property values will increase, once for the downtown area and again, much more for the highway. Center City will be 30 minutes by car, 20 minutes by train, so they'll be able to have wine and dinner and walk home. How much land do you think the pack owns? You mean individually? Well, yes, we do own a fair amount of the village individually, but I meant the pack itself. Do you know about the land owned by the pack? Ainsley shook her head slowly. To begin with, we own the woods on the south side of town, and the apartments on Drexel. Nice. We also own the apartments in Princeton and a majority share on the co-op grocery. We own all 7 parks, though we lease them to our town for $1 per year, and we own the woods. He paused. You already said the woods. Ainsley's head was spinning. I mean the college woods, and all the college property. What? That's impossible, she murmured, grasping the counter behind her with all her strength. It's not impossible. Your great-great-grandfather brought the college out of ruin during the Great Depression, but he made them sell him all the land. He gave the college a 75-year leasehold. Ainsley's knees felt weak. She gulped for air. I'm going to wager that you would say the pack has some pretty impressive assets, correct? Yes, she nodded, relieved to focus on trying to figure out how to go about calculating the value of all those acres. Anything to distract her from Eric's own impressive assets. The college literally occupied a third of the town's land, and the woods went on for miles. Did you know that there are wolves in other places? I never thought about it. Well, there are. There's a federation that the packs from all over the country report to. There are bigger, stronger, richer packs than ours. But with our land rising in value and that leasehold coming to an end, we're becoming more interesting. So, if we have no alpha, we become vulnerable. Young wannabe alphas from all over will come to try their hand at taking us. The Federation will step in to protect us. A dark look crossed his face. Isn't that a good thing? By protecting us, I mean that they will send in new leadership. But that's perfect. I told you, wolves don't work with assigned leaders, and the Federation doesn't take chances. They will break up this pack and scatter us so we don't rise up. They will raise our land and turn Tarker's Hollow and the college woods into new construction and strip malls. Then they'll lease it out or sell it off, and it will all be gone. Chapter 4. Gone. A barrage of scenes from Tarker's Hollow flooded Ainsley's mind. Her bare 4-year-old feet slapped the old sandstone sidewalks, the trees forming a warm green ceiling above. Young Sadie Epstein Walker waved at her from across the street, where she was pruning the pinkest roses in the world. Mrs. Lee, the librarian, greeted her quietly and slipped her the next Nancy Drew book, while her mother pursued the mystery section. The smell of the moist earth filled her nose as she picked blueberries at Penny's house, putting as many of the tangy sweet berries in her mouth as in her bucket. Pine needles squeaked under her feet as Brian Swinton chased her into the college woods. Even to this day, the sound of the fire horn was the same. Sadie Epstein Walker was still gardening in her floppy hat. The trees embraced each other over the streets and dappled the sidewalks with green shade. Could this be wiped away so easily? She opened her eyes. Eric was gazing at her with a look of naked sympathy. Did he realize she loved this town in spite of everything? Did he know how much it hurt her to go? That turned her thoughts to Brian again, and her heart iced over. I'm sorry, Eric. I really am. But I'm not a wolf. I'm just not. He stood angrily. At that moment, the silver wolf appeared. 1 second its shoulders rolled under a pelt of silvery fur, then during a single step it transformed into a young woman. Ainsley caught her breath in shock. Would she ever get used to such a thing? Not changing was so difficult. How did they make changing look so easy? The girl sniffed and threw her head up proudly. Naturally, she was naked. Tousled blonde hair skimmed her thin shoulders, but didn't reach her small, perfectly shaped breasts with their tiny pink nipples. Ainsley could see each of her ribs under her tawny, flawless skin. She was tall and lean, the opposite of Ainsley's softer, darker look. Running at night, my ass. The way the blonde was hanging on Eric gave Ainsley a clue as to what they were really up to. She could see why Eric would choose this beautiful wolf. She was lovely and bringing with a relentless energy. For a fraction of a second, Ainsley met the she-wolf's eye. To Ainsley's horror, the girl's skin began to shimmer. Her luminous brown eyes widened and her lips parted. Her hand dropped from Eric's shoulder. Ainsley could hear the girl's heart banging frantically in her chest. The kettle whistled and Ainsley managed to break eye contact. Quickly, she busied herself pouring the steaming water into the mugs. Fuck! Ainsley willed her heart to beat slowly. She knew the girl didn't like her. Now she was surely going to laugh at her and tell Eric that Ainsley was a giant slut, trying to draw every wolf she met, male or female. Chapter 5. Eric's heart almost stopped, the way Ainsley and Cressida were looking at each other. Cressida was a low-ranking female, and females weren't alphas anyway. He had to be going crazy to think that Ainsley could draw an alpha out of Cressida. Lust warred with jealousy in his chest, and he struggled to tamp them down and forget he'd seen what he'd thought he'd just seen. It was impossible. He forced himself back into the moment. "What the hell, Cressida?" Eric sighed. "Could you maybe say hello?" Ainsley turned. She seemed to be purposefully looking down, away from Cressida's eyes. That left her looking straight at the she-wolf's stiff little nipples. Eric's suspicions were at least partly confirmed when Ainsley blushed and looked away. "Hello," Cressida said in a low purr. "Hi, I'm Ainsley." "I know who you are. Would you care for some tea?" Cressida gave Ainsley a slow smile. "Nope, I think I'll be going now. Eric?" Ainsley was clearly squirming. Ainsley, I think we've taken up enough of your time. Call me when you're ready to talk more about the pack," he heard himself say. She shook her head, but pushed him a sweet-smelling little notepad and pen across the table anyway. "You will want to talk more. There's no point trying to run away," he said as he scrawled down his number. "And I saw your ad on neighborly.com. You can take it down. My crew will be here at 5 to take care of anything you need." "Thank you, Eric and Cressida, for checking on me," Ainsley replied in an annoyingly formal way. "And I would appreciate your help tonight, Eric, thank you. Cressida, did you find anything amiss in my house?" Cressida shook her head, puzzled. "There were some books all over the floor in your dad's sitting room, but I assume you're just going through them, right?" "Were they stacked neatly?" Ainsley asked. "No, they were all over the place. Did you not leave them like that?" Ainsley was pounding up the stairs in an instant. Eric followed her, taking the stairs 2 at a time. They threw open the door to the study. There were books everywhere, spread across the floor in a single layer. "Did your dad have any valuable books?" he asked. Ainsley dropped to her hands and knees and scanned the titles frantically. Eric tried to keep his mind on her search and away from her ass and her unbelievable smell. In this position, he could take her hips and plunge himself into her. To hell with the books. To hell with the house. To hell with Cressida. "I'm not sure if anything is missing, but I can see at least $50,000 in books right here on the floor." Cressida whistled in admiration. "What could they have wanted?" Ainsley asked plaintively. Eric was at a loss. "Cressida," Eric finally said, "I'm staying here to protect Ainsley. Do you want to stay and take a shift or go and get McGregor?" Eric stood, and Cressida was instantly draped over his shoulders. For some reason, it annoyed him. He fought the urge to push her off. "I don't need your protection," Ainsley retorted, jumping to her feet. "Eric, she says she's not one of us. Why should we protect her?" Cressida asked. "She is one of us. Whether she wants to admit it right now or not, we have to keep her safe." Ainsley closed her eyes. "Get out, please. I don't want you here," she said. Before Eric could decide what to do, Cressida turned on her heel, dropped seamlessly into her silvery wolf form, and trotted down the stairs. He heard the sound of her claws on the kitchen linoleum as she headed out the back door. "Ainsley," Eric tried once more. "Eric, please go." He unbuttoned her father's jeans and loved the way she caught her breath before she realized that he was just returning them. His hand touched hers for an instant as he handed them over, and he was sure she couldn't have missed the electric shock between them. But her eyes were cold. He sighed, and by the end of the sigh, he was a gigantic black wolf again. Ainsley looked searchingly into his eyes. Before he could think better of it, he affectionately bumped his furry head into her perfect breasts. Then he leapt down the stairs and loped into the night. Chapter 6. Ainsley was alone again. She padded downstairs and closed and locked all the doors. In all the time she had lived in this house, her parents had never locked the doors. Maybe it was time to start. She returned to the study and snapped a quick picture of the mess with her iPhone. Then she organized the books into the stacks she had created earlier in the week. Nothing was missing. She was still filled with a helpless anger, but there was nothing left to do, so she got ready for bed. As she slipped between the sheets, too furious to go to sleep, she thought of Eric. His arrogance of thinking he could tell her what to do, his muscular shoulders, his assumption that she was a frail thing that needed protection, his deep, kind eyes. Her thoughts of Eric continued to war as she drifted off. Chapter 7. That night, the dream returned. Something was different. Ainsley burst off the sidewalk and into the college woods, delighting in the sudden scent of pine as her eyes adjusted to the shade. She could hear Brian's footsteps behind her, so she ran faster. The pine needles could be slippery, but Ainsley never fell. Somehow, today, the tree seemed taller and the pine smell more pungent than usual. There was a thunder of footsteps. She looked back to see Julian crash into the woods behind her. The hair went up on the back of Ainsley's neck. This wasn't right. It was supposed to be Brian. She stopped and began to turn back. Julian swung his arm around her and lifted her up to spin her in a wild circle. He seemed so strong. She was practically weightless. Suddenly, she felt like a helium balloon and grasped his forearms, trying not to float away. He laughed and she looked into his eyes. The color was off. They were like blue fire. He set her down and flung his backpack to the ground. "Well?" He raised an eyebrow. She slowly slid her own backpack off her shoulders and placed it down. He was watching her, the electric blue of his eyes glowing oddly. What was wrong with him? "Julian, I don't think this is a good idea." The woods around them darkened. Ainsley shivered. "Poor darling, you're cold. Let me warm you." His smile was sincere, but his eyes were all wrong. She backed up a step. "I'm okay." "Ainsley, what's wrong?" "What's happening to your eyes?" A fleeting look crossed his face and was gone. "It's the light, Ainsley. Your eyes are glowing too." He took a step toward her. "You're beautiful." His voice had grown low and hypnotic. It made her heart race. She stepped forward to meet him, expecting soft, teasing kisses. He surprised her by pushing her into the tree at her back. The bark pressed its fingers to her shoulder blades as his insistent mouth claimed hers. He ran his hand down her ribcage and let his thumbs brush over her nipples. The unexpected thrill of pleasure made her gasp. He pressed his lean body against her soft one, and she could feel the length of him harden against her hip. Another shiver of desire ran through her in response. She pressed her breasts against his chest and ran her nails down his lightly muscled biceps. He growled in excitement and devoured her mouth again, rocking the bulge against her helplessly. Suddenly, Ainsley could hear the clink of silverware at the inn restaurant. She could smell the exhaust from the cars on the highway just outside town. She could taste the rain in the air. A storm was coming, 100 miles away. What was happening? Everything seemed familiar, but it wasn't right, like a bad imitation. She began to cry. Sobs racked her body. Julian pulled away. "Ainsley, I'm sorry. I know you're a nice girl. We don't have to do this." She heard herself say, "Julian, being here like this with you might just be my favorite thing." Her arms went around his neck and she grasped his bottom lip with her teeth and suckled gently. He surrendered with a growl and took her face in his hands. His tongue sought hers. Again he pressed himself against her. A wave of desire coursed over her, and she moaned into his mouth. He swept her off her feet and laid her gently onto a bed of pine needles. He lay down next to her on his side and stroked her from her rib cage down to her hip, his azure eyes searching hers. She could feel each individual pine needle under her, but she couldn't feel the cold ground, and she didn't care any more about the color of his eyes. She only cared about the heat of his hand as it traveled the length of her body. She arched her back, offering her breasts. He responded immediately, cupping her right breast in his hand reverently. She watched as his thumb brushed over the nipple again, and his lips parted in wonder as her nipple swelled, popping over the demi-cup of her bra and pushing against the fabric of her thin t-shirt. Ainsley's head fell back on the pine needles as he mouthed her nipple through her cotton t-shirt. The sensation was overwhelming, and she felt it all over at once. Soon the muted contact was not enough for him, and he lifted her shirt. She helped him slip it over her head. Her breasts ached as he pulled away from her to remove his Tarker's Hollow High t-shirt. His lightly muscled body was graceful, yet powerful. He gave her no time to admire it. Quickly, he dipped his head down to nuzzle and kiss her breasts gently. She clutched his hair, pressing him to her. He responded with gentle sucking. The moan that escaped her immediately seemed to give him confidence, and he drew harder. Ainsley could see stars. Her skin prickled all over. She felt too big for her body, and she could hear Julian's blood pounding through his veins. The scent of his arousal burned in her nostrils. When he pressed against her side, she could feel his erection through their clothes. She began clawing at his jeans, trying to remove them. They groped at each other frantically. Their shared lack of experience slowed progress, but in the end passion won out, and all their clothing was spread around them. Julian lay on top of her. They were both naked and shivering with desire. By this time, Ainsley was half mad with lust and a horrid crawling feeling. She was sure as soon as he was inside her, the fire would be assuaged. Wasn't that how it was supposed to work? She shifted her hips to meet his, and he found his way to press against her most sensitive spot. He tried to be gentle, but in the end he had to push hard against her to find entry. He gasped as she received him. The pain was brief. "Are you okay?" he asked her through a clenched jaw. She smiled tightly and nodded. When he was fully inside her, she shuddered in ecstasy, but the crawling feeling grew instead of receding. Her teeth began to ache, and her skin rippled unnaturally over her muscles. Julian was too lost in sensation to notice. Tiny beads of sweat formed on his forehead. He thrust slowly, but his restraint was costing him. Soon he would lose control, and Ainsley knew it would be over. Hoping to end it quickly and escape that wretched pull, Ainsley lifted her hips and raked her nails into his back. "Easy," he pleaded. She responded by latching onto his neck and sucking his salty skin. "Ainsley!" He grasped her hips and ground himself into her, unable to contain himself. She could smell the blood throbbing in his cock and hear the semen teeming and buzzing to be released into her. The pain inside her was entirely gone. There was only the strange nauseous pull and the sharp honeyed pleasure warring for her attention. He shifted his weight and found a different angle inside her. The pleasure in Ainsley flared and washed over her. She soared and exploded like a firework. Every nerve ending was sparkling. She cried out in her ecstasy. Julian swelled inside her immediately, his blue eyes sparkling with anticipation. But Ainsley's pleasure had dissipated, and now all that was left was the roiling crush of the nasty thing that consumed her. It all happened in an instant. She felt her body expand. It felt like the first stretch after sleeping late on a lazy Sunday. The relief was exquisite. The glimmer in Julian's eyes turned to terror. His mouth gaped open. She pushed him off her effortlessly, and hardly noticed as he ejaculated into the air. Her eyes were focused on his throat. He hit the ground hard on his back. The fall had knocked the wind out of him, and he made the sound of a creaking door as he struggled for air. His oblivious cock was still convulsing and shooting out liquidy webs that covered his belly. The veins in his neck were bulging. Ainsley pounced. Her paws framed his head. The smell of his fear and pain filled her muzzle. The cocktail of weaknesses was dizzying. She lifted her head and howled a note of triumph before biting down on his neck. Her canines sank through his flesh effortlessly. She was rewarded with the mewling, gurgling sound of his wordless pleas. Then the first shot of blood hit the back of her throat. Its coppery warmth spread down her chest and into her belly. Her whole body sang with happiness. She dove into him again, enjoying the spectrum of texture. The soft, buttery flesh, the bone that worked her vice-like jaw, but most of all, the seemingly endless waterfall of blood. An alarm sounded in the distance, reverberating in her sensitive ears at an awful pitch. It was too far off to be a threat to Ainsley's prize, so she ignored it. He sputtered once or twice and was out. The game was too easy, but the prize was so delicious. She lapped the sweet ambrosia from his neck. The alarm jangled again. She shook her head and her lean muscles rippled down to her tail, but she couldn't escape the horrid sound. She batted at her ear with a paw. Her paw was caught in a tangle of long human hair. Ainsley startled awake. Her cell phone was ringing from its charger next to the bed. She grabbed it. Julie and Maggie. She dropped it back on the bedside table like it was on fire. Ainsley hugged her knees to her chest and rocked back and forth, coaxing her mind back to the real world. Breathe in, breathe out. It was only a dream. The phone jangled again. There was no way she could talk to Julian right now. Chapter 8. Ainsley awoke with a dry throat and a sticky, awful feeling. Sunlight was pouring in the window. What time was it? She leapt out of bed. Ainsley Connor never overslept. She snatched up her phone and noticed a message from Julian. Julian. The dream. She closed her eyes and took a careful breath. It was just a dream. She had been having the dream off and on for a decade. It never changed. Until last night. Was that what really happened to Brian? Usually in the dream she woke up before that part. She had blacked out that day. She didn't remember anything. Was this her subconscious trying to let her know the truth? Ever since she came back to this godforsaken town, it had been one nasty surprise after another. She glanced back at the phone. It was 8:17 a.m. Ainsley couldn't remember the last time she'd slept past 6:30. She made her bed carefully. It was a mass of tangled sheets and overboard pillows. But when she had finished, there was no more physical evidence of a troubled night. She picked out a pair of faded jeans and a pink Timberwolves t-shirt from high school and glanced at the logo in the mirror. Tarker's Hollow Timberwolves. Subtle. It was certainly going to be a shopping day. She headed to her parents' bathroom and turned on the hot water. After a few minutes under the heavenly spray of the fancy dual shower heads, Ainsley began to relax. She lathered a loofah with sea salt soap and scrubbed herself until she was pink all over. The scent of cinnamon bun shampoo made the corners of her mouth turn up as she smoothed it into her hair. She remembered the delicious smell of Eric, and her heart thudded. God, he was handsome. The memory of his masculine body and the graceful, sinewy way he moved was almost overpowering. Now that she was safely out of his gaze, she could fantasize all she wanted. What would it be like to be his mate? Ainsley sighed as she imagined curling up under the sheets with him, sliding her hands across his muscled chest and drinking in that heady aroma. It was awful to be so attracted to someone who was so wrong for her. It seemed that he was attracted to her too. Or was it just that she drew his alpha? Clearly, Cressida was more its type. Come to think of it, the nicest guys usually were under the thumb of a mean, skinny blonde. Though Cressida hadn't been as mean as she could have been. Ainsley blushed a little at the memory of whatever had happened with Cressida. She had never had those feelings about a woman before. She wondered what it could mean. It had to be part of the whole wolf thing. Maybe her call to Eric had been strong enough to affect her as well. Thinking about Eric with Cressida was horrible and exciting at the same time. Ainsley firmly pushed her thoughts away from it. Could Eric be right about the town? Once again, she wished she had taken advantage of her parents' information while she had the chance. It seemed outlandish that an underground wolf organization existed that was powerful enough to destroy a whole town. But if it were true, which would be worse? To let them take the town, or to surrender to her wolf and become a bloodthirsty murderer at every full moon? Ainsley thought again of last night's dream and repressed a shudder. The water beat down to rinse away every bubble. She imagined the thoughts of the previous night swirling down the drain alongside the lather, and felt a little more normal. It was natural to have weird, crazy dreams at a time like this, wasn't it? She had lost her parents, slept with a new guy, found giant sexy wolves in her childhood home, and discovered her father's book collection ransacked. If she wasn't allowed a super weird dream last night, then really, who should have those dreams? She smoothed on her honeysuckle lotion. Somehow, the only underwear she had brought was sexy stuff, so a layer of thin satin and lace went on under her old jeans and t-shirt. She dried her hair, then brushed it until it shone and put it into a ponytail. Once her diamond studs slid into her ears, she was feeling like herself again. Ainsley's skin had always been blessedly clear. Her large, dark eyes and dark hair gave enough contrast that a bit of sheer powder and tinted lip gloss were enough for a day of shopping. It was odd to lock the doors for a daytime trip. Ainsley walked all around the house, securing the porch and patio as well as the back door. As Ainsley considered that each window on the porch was large enough for a person to walk through, and none had working locks, she realized she ought to call the police to establish that someone had been in the home. She sighed and looked at her watch. It was already 9:30. Who knew how long it would take to file a police report? But it had to be done. The tiny police station picked up on the first ring. "Darker's Hollow Police, fire an ambulance. What's your emergency?" "Hi there, this is Ainsley Connor. It's not an emergency, but someone has been in my house." "Ainsley, is that you?" Yes." "It's me, Dale. Are you okay, honey? Did they take anything? I'll send someone right over." "Yes, I'm fine, Dale, thank you." "I hope you don't mind me saying so, but I don't know if you should be staying by yourself these days. Does Margie have a room to let?" Dale was an elderly man. It was odd to realize that he must be a wolf. Ainsley wondered fleetingly if Margie was a wolf too. She was the proprietor of one of Tarker's Hollow's 2 bed and breakfasts. "I'm fine, Dale, really. Tell Lana I said hello." There was a loud chirp-chirp outside as a police car pulled up out front. Ainsley winced. She wished they hadn't done that. No need for Sadie Epstein Walker to have a reason to come bang on the door. "Sounds like help is at your doorstep, honey. Stop by the house if you have a minute to visit." She hung up with a little smile. It was such a small town. Footsteps on the front porch reached the door just as she did. Ainsley smoothed down her ponytail and grabbed the handle as the bell rang. The door swung open to frame a trim officer in a navy blue uniform. Her shiny black ponytail shone in the morning sunlight. A look of professional concern was on her heart-shaped face. "Grace?" Ainsley breathed. "No way." "Ainsley!" Grace smiled, and her dark eyes danced. "I heard you went to the police academy, but I had no idea you were working in Tarker's Hollow." Ainsley stepped aside to let her in. They embraced impulsively, then headed right for the kitchen just as they had in high school. "Yes, they brought me in when Herb Yarnall retired. It's a great feeling." Grace sat in her usual spot at the oak table, and Ainsley rummaged in the fridge for something fancy to drink. When they were younger, Mrs. Cortez had never let Grace drink anything but water or milk at home, so she adored the apple cider, lemonade, and flavored teas Ainsley's mother kept around. Ainsley hadn't been grocery shopping since she had got home, but there was a bottle of mint honest tea in the door of the fridge. She held it out to Grace, who nodded enthusiastically. "I would have thought you'd set your sights higher than Tarker's Hollow. You were valedictorian." "You gave me a run for my money, though, didn't you?" Grace joked. Ainsley filled 2 mason jars with ice and opened the tea bottle. "Seriously, though, I don't mean to be rude, but—" "Ainsley, I love this town," she said simply. There is nothing I want more than to protect it. And maybe one day I'll raise my own children here. You didn't get married yet either, huh? Ainsley asked, glancing at Grace's bare ring finger. Juan Cortez is enough of a mouthful. I don't know if I can add another. Grace had a love-hate relationship with her hyphenated name. Her parents had adopted her from China when she was only a year old. To honor her nationality, they'd given her the surname of her biological mother, hyphenated with their own last name. The Cortez family tree's roots were in Mexico. No way, you'll just make Mr. Right take yours. You seriously need to get on Facebook, Ainsley. This is embarrassing. How could you be out of touch for so long? You're not one of those Luddite hipster types who don't believe in technology, are you? God, no, Ainsley laughed. She was normally never without a phone in her hand and an iPad tucked under her arm. Technology owned her. There were times when she felt like her MacBook Air was an extension in her lap, and she was more machine than woman. This trip home was a welcome relief from all those screens. Then why no Facebook? Grace teased her with a pretend sad face. Ainsley poured. The ice cubes crackled as the tea hit them. It's complicated, she explained. Mostly it's because in my job I can't have a public social life. She sat down in her usual spot, opposite Grace, and put down her own cup on the ring that had marked the space for her drink ever since she could remember. I think I may know why else, but that's not why I'm here today. Or is it? Ainsley froze and looked into Grace's eyes. She hadn't lost touch with Grace by accident. Ainsley never had the heart to share what she was. She wouldn't have been able to bear the look of disappointment from her childhood friend. Grace held her gaze. Her expression was dead serious. Grace, you know that Tarker's Hollow is a special place. Do you know how special? Ainsley asked carefully. When Herb Yarnell retired, the chief had an appointment decision to make. He needed to bring in someone new and trustworthy. My loyalty was tested, and I did not come out wanting. If you're asking if I know what happens in this town at the full moon, the answer is yes. The wind went out of Ainsley's lungs. So, with that in mind, Grace said crisply, can you tell me what happened here? When did you discover that someone had been in the house? Ainsley went through the events of the previous evening, leaving out just a few choice bits. Grace took careful notes. As far as I can tell, nothing is missing, Ainsley finished. Maybe it was just kids sneaking in here on a dare. Grace nodded and brushed an invisible fleck of dust off her thigh. Ainsley recognized her friend's old tell. You think it's serious, don't you? You're not just anyone, Ainsley, and those aren't just anyone's books. May I see the room? Sure. They ascended the steps quietly. Grace's eyes took in every detail. When they reached the study, Grace pursed her lips. Ainsley, did you reorganize these books? Uh-oh. Well, yes. Ainsley smoothed her ponytail. I needed to know if anything was missing. Why didn't you call last night? Because I was mad with Eric? Because I'm a big bad wolf and I'm not afraid of anything? I don't know. It seemed silly to call when nothing was missing. It's not silly to call. You've already disturbed any evidence that might have been here. Didn't you stop to think that the police ought to be called to look at it? Or that maybe you shouldn't just go to sleep in the house after finding this? Have you ever seen a cop show on TV? You know what I am, Grace. No, I wasn't afraid to go to sleep. I just wanted to establish that there was an intrusion, just in case. I took a picture of the books with my phone before I cleaned them up. Do you want me to send it to you? Sure, it's better than nothing. Grace handed her a business card. My email's on here. Ainsley took the card and slipped it in her pocket. They looked at each other awkwardly for a moment. Is there anything else I should know? Grace asked. If your father had anything special in this room, or in the house, I need to know about it. Keep in mind I know how important he was, and that I have pledged to serve and protect this town, with all its secrets. Grace, you probably know more about my father and his secrets than I do. You left in a hurry, but you must have asked questions first. Ainsley shook her head ruefully. I didn't, and now I can't. The finality of it hit her again, and tears prickled her eyes. To her credit, Grace didn't try to hug her or comfort her. The young officer's presence was soothing. Ainsley could hear her heart beating and the smell of mint tea on Grace's breath and the musk of a single dog hair on her uniform pants. Labrador? No, German Shepherd. Grace hesitated for a moment, like she was trying to decide her course of action carefully. Maybe you can, Grace suggested softly. Ainsley's head snapped up. What? Tarker's Hollow is unusual even when there isn't a full moon, but I shouldn't really discuss it when I'm on duty. Let's just say I might know of a way you can ask your parents a few of those questions. Unless you can bring back the dead, I don't see how that's possible. Grace was silent. Grace, you can't mean, no, I can't bring back the dead, but sometimes I can open up a line of communication. Ainsley couldn't think of anything to say that wouldn't show her disbelief. Who would think that Grace Kwan Cortez would turn out to be a flake? Grace must have caught the look in her old friend's eyes. Ainsley, you turn into a giant wolf once a month. Are you really in a position to look at me like I'm on the cover of the National Enquirer? Fair enough. I'm sorry, Grace, it was just a long night. What exactly are you saying you can do? Why don't I come back when I'm off duty and we can talk about it? I don't know, Grace. I'm off all day tomorrow. You have my card. Text me. It would be good to catch up either way. Grace smiled her movie star smile, and Ainsley couldn't help smiling back. Chapter 9. Ainsley sighed. She had promised herself that she would spend just 10 minutes breezing through work email after Grace left, and then head out shopping. Nearly half an hour had passed, and she had just finished skimming the mountain of messages. It seemed that although her clients thought her stand-in, stupid Zach Grants, was great, they all wanted to check in with her on just one little thing. Ainsley prepared a quick spreadsheet with suggestions for damage control on the little things that really mattered and emailed it to her broker. Then she shut the laptop and plugged it in. As soon as she stood, she felt dizzy. It was 10 a.m. Had she really not even had breakfast yet? As she tried to remember, her cell phone rang. It was Julian. Again. She dismissed the call. Even though she knew the dream was just a dream, the whole thing was still creeping her out. She'd feel better after a meal, probably. Ainsley grabbed her bag, turned off the lights, and locked the doors. Surely she would smell any intruders. Her senses seemed to be heightened in Tarker's Hollow. Ainsley froze. Why hadn't she smelled an intruder? She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply through her nose. She smelled herself, Grace, Eric, and Cressida. There was a softer note of her parents, her younger self, the mailman, the plumber, the guy who serviced the heater, and the faculty and students who used to visit. There was nothing unexpected and recent. There had to be an explanation. Was it possible to hide your scent? Once again, she regretted not knowing more about being a wolf. Maybe she could ask Eric when he came tonight with his crew to help her finish moving things. Why did her heart skip a beat thinking about having Eric back in her house? She glanced at her phone again and sighed at the time, then headed outside. Ainsley approached her dad's old Volvo wagon with caution. It had as much character as the house, she was sure. On the other hand, it was old as dirt. Her dad had been determined to drive it into the ground. It had almost 200,000 miles on it, and he probably felt it was only halfway there. Once the air conditioning was on and the music was bumping, Ainsley began to feel better. She decided to run to the upscale mall half an hour away. She was sure there were shops in Tarker's Hollow she ought to patronize, but sometimes a girl just wanted some anonymity and designer clothes. After an almond croissant and a hazelnut coffee, Ainsley felt energized enough to shop. Her heels slapped the marble floors with a purpose as she skirted the leisurely women standing aimlessly through the mall. Ainsley's curvy body often made shopping a challenge in the high-end shops in Manhattan. Sometimes she wondered if the whole city were made up of starving ballerinas. She didn't think of shopping as enjoyable, but as a challenge to tackle. However, Philadelphia's storied love of soft pretzels and cheesesteaks perhaps influenced the size choices of shops. It turned out that there was plenty to choose from, over a size 2. Nordstrom was her usual fare for work suits, but somehow nothing seemed quite right. As she headed toward Neiman Marcus, the quirky little cotton dresses with swirly skirts and a boutique window caught Ainsley's eye, so she stopped in. The vibrant colors were almost overwhelming. Manhattanites dressed in a predictable wash of grays and blacks, with the occasional blood-red scarf or power tie. These dresses, on the other hand, were a feast of greens and yellows and cerulean blues. Ainsley paused in front of a dress so pink it made her think of a child's drawing of a birthday cake. "Looking for something special?" the shopgirl said, viewing Ainsley's choice in an admiring way. "Well, I usually dress either for business or for cleaning the house. I've got a little time off, and it seems that I have nothing in between," Ainsley confided, enjoying the chance for little girl talk that didn't involve anything supernatural. "I'm Jamie," she said, "and I know just what you're looking for. Go grab a changing room. I'll bring you a stack." Indeed, they did have just what Ainsley wanted, and even something she hadn't known she wanted. And, somehow, Jamie had known Ainsley's measurements without asking or using a tape. Everything she brought fit like a glove. Ainsley spent a relaxing hour draping herself in light fabrics and lush colors and enjoying the company of the straightforward salesgirl. "Well, I think you cleaned us out," Jamie laughed delightedly as she rang up 2 large bags of playful dresses. Ainsley smiled. It was nice to think that someone as dedicated to customer service as this young woman would be taking home a healthy commission for her hard work and good instincts. Before she left, Jamie suggested the best shops for shoes and which salespeople to ask for. Ainsley couldn't resist giving them a try. Jamie hadn't steered her wrong. Shoe shopping then led to a mani-pedi session at the salon that was highly recommended by the young man at the shoe store. Afterward, she stopped in Victoria's Secret for just a few more nice things. In for a penny, in for a pound, she told herself. But no, it was really time to go. On her way out, she passed David Yurman. The blue topaz cuff that always caught her eye in the window on Madison Avenue was in a display case just inside. It would look perfect with the faux wrap dress she'd just bought. She paused uncertainly, then ducked inside and made one last purchase. Carrying her bags back to her car, Ainsley almost felt guilty. Then she thought about the long hours she put in. Ainsley worked long and hard enough that she literally had no place in her closet for fun clothes. Well, that was going to change, at least for a couple of days. If she had to deal with wolves and who knew what else, she was going to look good doing it. The Volvo started up right away. The radio played all the right songs, and the traffic was light. The trip back to Tarker's Hollow was the capper to a perfect morning. Ainsley hopped out of the car humming. As she carried her bags inside, the phone rang again. Julian. Chapter 10. No matter what he did, Eric could not get Ainsley Connor off his mind. He hadn't slept much. He tossed and turned and thought about her eyes, her soft body, her luscious smell. Everything at the site this morning seemed to be going smoothly, leaving him too much time to think. Clive Warren. Had Ainsley's dad really wanted her to mate with Clive? The Warrens were total purists. Clive's parents weren't big fans of Connor as alpha, but Clive himself never seemed like a bad guy. He was a good football player, but he didn't lord it over anybody. He was a good cop. There were worse choices. Funny that Connor wanted a working man for his daughter, not an academic. Eric had always respected Michael Connor, and now he truly felt the respect was mutual. It was good to know Connor hadn't just been quietly condescending all those years. Eric couldn't help wondering if a blue-collar man was good enough. Why hadn't Connor thought of him? Connor called him all the time for his opinions on the highway and how to handle the pack finances. The more Eric thought about it, the more it seemed like Ainsley's dad had been grooming him for the role of the pack's next alpha. Eric could picture him now, listening intently with those unblinking brown eyes. He never shared his own thoughts. An alpha didn't have to let anyone in on his decisions. But he would ask questions, just the right questions, to help Eric articulate facets of the problem he hadn't thought of before. When he had heard enough, he would nod and reach over to shake Eric's hand. "Thank you, son," he would say. "Well done. As usual, you have given me plenty to think about." Eric's wolf would stand tall with pride at having pleased his alpha. Eric did not remember ever hearing of Clive Warren being called to the alpha for counsel. At that moment, he heard the chirp-chirp of a police car. As though Eric's thoughts had summoned him, Clive Warren pulled up on the shoulder by the site. Eric strode over to see him. "Hey, Clive." "Jensen, what's new?" "Nothing, man. Beautiful day, perfect for digging." Clive smiled. "Anything wrong?" "Nope, just patrolling. Grace told me there was a break-in at the Connors yesterday. You didn't see anyone coming out of there, did you?" Eric shook his head. "Have you seen Ainsley since she got back?" Eric asked, before Clive could ask any follow-up questions. Clive colored and looked down. Eric could hear his heart beating hard. "Yeah, I bumped into her last night," he muttered. So it was already happening. Eric mentally gave his wolf a shake and, as much as it hurt, made himself do the right thing. It was about the pack. It was about Ainsley. It wasn't about him. "Clive, I think you would make a great alpha, and Ainsley needs you. Don't give up on her. She'll come around." Clive's head snapped up and he opened and closed his mouth. His cheeks got a little pinker, and he swiftly grabbed Eric's hand and pumped it enthusiastically. "Thank you, Eric. I know you love this town, just like I do. I'll bring Ainsley home." Eric nodded. It was painful, but he would get used to thinking of Ainsley with Clive. Wouldn't he? Chapter 11. Ainsley rejected the call. It wasn't that she was playing hard to get. It was just that the dream had thrown her off a bit. She would catch up with Julian tomorrow. She carefully unpacked each bag, hung the dresses in her girlhood closet next to a row of homemade Halloween costumes that no one had the heart to part with after all these years. Ainsley's mom had been handy with everything, from lawnmower repairs to needle and thread. Her Halloween costumes were always spectacular. God, she missed her parents. She always had, but when they weren't speaking, there was at least a tiny part of her that she knew couldn't stay mad forever. As she mused over the zombie Girl Scout costume that had been one of her favorites, complete with a box depicting brain-flavored cookies, she decided that maybe she would like to visit the college and take a look at her dad's office today. She would need to keep in touch with Carol for the key. But first, a snack. She had missed lunch. Sleeping in had thrown her off schedule. A search of the pantry yielded a can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup. She really needed to get to the co-op. Ainsley poured the soup in a cup, added half the recommended water, and heated in the microwave. She drank it slowly while she watched the neighbor kids through the window. They were chasing their deliriously happy chocolate lab with water pistols. The dog was trying to catch the water in her mouth. One little girl doubled over in delight, squealing, "He's trying to drink it!" as the dog leapt for a jolt of water and landed in the rhododendrons. Ainsley was suddenly aware that the mailman was walking down the sidewalk to her house, though she couldn't see him. He would arrive at the front door in 3, 2, 1, clink. The mailbox snapped shut. Her senses were really heightening here. Usually the moon was full before she got waves of sensory info without trying. It must be something about the town. Or maybe it was the nearness of the other wolves. Ainsley walked to the mailbox. Across the street, Sadie Epstein Walker was weeding the flower beds and waved her gloved hand once. Ainsley waved back. The mail was mostly coupons, but there was a thick manila envelope, too. It had her name written on it. No postage mark or stamp. Someone must have dropped it in the mailbox earlier. Ainsley carried it back into the kitchen and bent the metal brad on the envelope to open the flap. A sheet of paper with the college letterhead greeted her. "It was a pleasure to see you last night, Ainsley. I know you're busy with the house, but I thought I'd stop by with the key to your father's office, just in case you have time. Please let me know if there is anything I can do to help you. Your friend, Carol Lotus." There was a phone number at the end. Ainsley upended the envelope, and a single brass key slid into her waiting palm. "Ask and ye shall receive." Funny that she hadn't noticed Carol's scent when she arrived back at the house. Maybe it was just that Carol had been here before over the years. Ainsley slipped into one of her new dresses and a pretty pair of slides and headed out on foot. Somehow, the heavy, humid air felt cool and light on her bare shoulders. The flats meant she had to walk more slowly than usual. It was a gorgeous day in spite of the heat. The flowers and trees were at the peak of their summer lushness. The town looked like a photoshopped postcard of upscale suburbia. By some miracle, she made it down Elm and across Yale without bumping into anyone. Soon the shade of the college woods embraced her, and her feet carried her down the familiar path as she mused about last night. Given the intimate evening she'd had with Julian, it was funny that her thoughts kept going back to Eric. She could see the shimmering heat around his powerful, naked form every time she closed her eyes. A thrill coursed through her as she imagined what it would be like to lose herself in the thrall of his alpha. If only it didn't mean giving up her life and dreams to literally be his bitch. She remembered how ready he was to start ordering her around. Why would her parents want her to marry him? Thank goodness she hadn't told him about that. Chapter 12. Ainsley rounded the corner to Scott Hall and pulled open the heavy wooden door. The second floor was up a tremendous flight of marble stairs. The auditorium ceiling was so high it made the upper story feel much higher than normal. By the time she got to the top, she was nearly breathless. Ainsley turned the brass key in the lock to her father's office and shut her eyes to take in the whoosh of leather and books that always came out of this room. When she opened them, she nearly screamed. All of her father's gorgeous volumes were spread across the floor. Papers were everywhere. The quarter-sawn oak roll-down desk had been forced open. The gaping opening revealed another mess of papers and books. Ainsley stood frozen in the doorway. It was too much. She took a breath and pulled Carol's note from her purse. With shaking hands, she entered Carol's number on her iPhone. "Hello?" the quavery voice said after the first ring. "Carol, it's me, Ainsley. Did you get my note?" "Yes, I'm at my dad's office. When were you last in here?" "The department has been in upheaval since we lost your father. I stop in there almost every day for one reason or another. Why?" "Were you in here today?" "Well, no, but I stopped in yesterday. Is something wrong, Ainsley?" "How did things look? Were they in order?" "Your father was a very neat man," Carol said. "Someone has been in here. It looks like a tornado went through. I don't even know what might be missing." "Oh, my word. I'll be right over, Ainsley. Don't move a muscle. I'm coming." Ainsley hung up and slid the phone back in her purse. She wanted nothing more than to sink into the leather Chesterfield, but after being scolded by Grace this morning, the last thing she wanted to do was touch anything. Instead, she walked back to the marble staircase, sat carefully on the top step and leaned against the wrought iron railing. She shut her eyes and inhaled deeply. It was no use. There had been so many people in and out of this hall and that office, she would never be able to track a single scent. There was the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Before Ainsley could stand, Clive Warren appeared at her feet. "Ainsley, are you all right?" he asked, a little too loudly. "I'm fine, Clive, I'm fine." He paused and knelt on a step below her, a look of obvious relief on his handsome face. She studied him calmly. His gigantic hands, one on the railing and one just below her, made her feet look tiny. His blue uniform pulled against his muscular chest. He was breathing heavily after his rushed trip up the staircase, and he was exuding a woodsy scent that, if not as delicious as Eric's, was certainly attractive. He searched her face. She smiled reassuringly at him. His returning smile was so pure and happy that the kernel of fear that had settled into the pit of her stomach dissolved. "Whoever it was is long gone. Did Carol call?" "Yes, I was patrolling campus. Every once in a while we get pranksters over here when the school's out of session. When Carol said you'd called, I rushed over." "Thank you, Clive. Maybe we can take a look inside. I didn't touch anything this time." "I'm just glad you're okay," he said gruffly. He was on his feet swiftly for a man of his size. Ainsley remembered again that he wasn't only a man. He reached for her and she allowed him to take her hand in his and lift her back to standing. His grip was warm and he pulled her up like she was light as a feather. She smiled up at him. His eyes were so blue. Just as she began to fight her brain, which decidedly wanted to indulge in a quick fantasy, he looked away politely. Clive headed to the open room. He stood into the threshold and scanned the room coolly. Then he turned back to her and his gaze softened. "Ainsley, this is going to take a little while. Can I run you home?" "Oh, I'll be fine," Ainsley said quickly. "I don't think you should be by yourself right now. You must be very upset, and besides, you may be in danger," Clive said carefully. "But I might be able to help you if I'm here." "I'm assuming someone is looking for valuable books of your father's." "That would make sense, except from right here I can see 3 first editions. They looked at the room together. "The same thing was true at the house, Clive. I can't think of anything of value that was taken. And so many valuable books were left behind," she said. "Ainsley, I'll tell you what. Why don't you let me take you home? We will catalog everything here that we find. Then you can go through it with us, and tell us if anything isn't here, or point out if anything is still here that a burglar would have wanted. I know you might feel fine now, but you're probably close to shock with so many surprises. It would be best for you to go about whatever else you had planned for the day, and let us take our time here and contact you when we have a better read on the situation." She had to admit it sounded reasonable, and seeing her father's office this way was making her more upset by the minute. She looked back into his Caribbean blue eyes to nod her assent. His jaw relaxed, and he reached out to touch her shoulder in sympathy. An electric shock ran through her, and his outline began to dance around her eyes. His hand slid to her hip, and she felt her heart slow and then stutter to match his. Suddenly, there was the clattering of high heels on the marble stair. "Ainsley?" a quavering voice squeaked. "Fuck." Ainsley withdrew from Clive, and instantly the haze disappeared. They both looked away, though Ainsley could hear him panting, and she knew it wasn't from the staircase. "Hi, Carol," she returned weakly. I'm fine. Clive Warren is here." "Oh, thank goodness, Ainsley. As soon as we got off the phone, I started to worry that someone up to no good might still be lurking around. After all, I was in your father's office just yesterday." Carol tottered breathlessly up the last few steps. "I'm fine," Ainsley repeated, smoothing her dress over her hips. Carol clapped on her shoulder firmly and sighed. Then she peeked over Ainsley's shoulder into the office. "Oh, my heavens!" "It's bad, Carol," Clive agreed. "I've just told Ainsley that I'll run her home and then come back to take stock of the damage. This will take time." "Oh, I'll take you home, Ainsley. My car is right out front." Clive raised his eyebrows at Ainsley in question. She nodded, not without a passing twinge of regret. He nodded back and looked almost relieved. His duty was important to him. "Thank you, Carol. That'd be great." "Carol, please make sure you see her inside," Clive interjected. "She's had a long day." "Of course," Carol chirped. "Come on, Ainsley, let's get you home. I'll fix you some iced tea." "Thank you, Clive," Ainsley said softly, tucking her hair behind her ear self-consciously. "Ainsley, it's my pleasure." He looked like he wanted to say more. Instead, he turned back to the open doorway. Chapter 13. Ainsley and Carol stopped on the way home for groceries. The co-op was in full swing, and Ainsley was grateful for the older woman's comforting presence. As they walked the aisles, Ainsley received many glances and stares. Most were very friendly. "Ainsley Connor, it's a pleasure to see you," declared Anna Roden with a little wink. "Carol," Trudy Weiss nodded approvingly. "Ainsley?" There were the less grandmotherly stares from the young men, too. Several of them gaped at Ainsley in open admiration. Ainsley smoothed her skirt and tucked her hair behind her ear. Carol gave her a sympathetic smile. "They can't help it, Ainsley," she said. "It's instinct. You're going to draw the alpha. This whole town is buzzing with male energy." Ainsley did a double take. Are you saying that you—" Ainsley couldn't finish. "Of course I'm a wolf," Carol whispered. "Good heavens, did you not even know that?" "Hi, Carol. Hi, Ainsley," Stan Snyder said with a leer. He tried hard to catch Ainsley's eye. "Goodbye, Stan," Carol said firmly. "I had no idea, Carol," Ainsley said. Her heart lifted as she realized she might have found a confidant who could give her answers. One who wasn't trying to get into her pants, that is. "Well, I'm starting to realize that there's a lot you don't know. At any rate, your mere presence in town is stirring up the wolves. You're going to have to choose as quickly as you can. Do you want my input?" I personally can't say enough good things about Eric Jensen. I know he's not as good-looking as Clive Warren, but he's smart, and everyone respects him." Wow, Ainsley didn't know what to say. "I know you still may have, wild oats to sow, dear," Carol said uncomfortably. "But I might suggest avoiding the human men. I don't think many people in town know that you spent time with Julie and Maggie yesterday, and I know you only did it because you miss your dad, but it would probably make the men crazy if they found out. We're a quiet town, but we can only take so much. I hope you don't think it's sexist. It's only because we need an alpha so much." She looked searchingly at Ainsley. "Carol, I'm only beginning to realize what a big deal it is for me to be here. But I need you to understand that I'm just here to pack up the house and get it sold so I can go back to New York. Whatever wolf issues there are, they will need to be worked out by the wolves. I'm not part of it." "I'm sorry you feel that way, Ainsley. I don't know what we ever did to disappoint you. I know we're not normal here, but you are one of us, and we love you, and our community is in danger. If you think we can work it out without you, you're wrong." "Carol, what would have happened if I died in an accident, too? You can't tell me that the town would be wrecked. There has to be something else." "Hello, Myrtle," Carol called. Myrtle Turner smiled shyly at Ainsley. "This probably isn't the best time to talk about it, Ainsley, but the short answer is that you didn't die, thank goodness, and no, there is no one else to take your place. Now, grab a cart, honey, there's no rush, and I'm sure you'll need your energy to clean out that big house." Ainsley tried to concentrate on shopping. Everything at the co-op these days seemed to be grass-fed, organic, and gluten-free, and the new building was cheerful and so well-lit. She remembered the days when the co-op was housed in a dark, fishy-smelling storefront next door. Some changes in this town were for the better. She remembered that Eric had said the pack owned the majority of the shares in the co-op, and she felt an odd little twinge of pride. Eric. All roads led to him. Ainsley was going to be face-to-face with him in just an hour, though she knew it did no good to befriend him if she wasn't going to stick around and be his mate. She couldn't help feeling a rush of excitement at the thought of seeing him again. As her heartbeat quickened, several young men turned to her. Could they have noticed? She could suddenly smell arousal thick in the air. There was a thunder of hearts beating in response to hers. The air was practically reverberating with it. Fuck. A young man with a co-op sweatshirt rounded the corner of the dairy cabinet and stopped just short of knocking her over. He stared into her open eyes with unveiled longing. Ainsley caught her breath and tried to slow her heart. The young man gained control of himself, barely. Can I help you find anything, miss? His pulse throbbed in his neck, and a bead of perspiration appeared between his forehead and the dark brown curls of his hair. She shook her head mutely. Carol took her arm and firmly marched her to the line. Was that because of me? Yes, and that is just going to get worse as the moon waxes. What were you thinking about? Nothing, just Eric. Ainsley blushed. Good girl. Carol smiled, but her lips were pressed together in concern. Chapter 14. By the time they got back to the house, it was nearly 5 o'clock. Ainsley thanked Carol and explained that Eric was coming to help move some furniture. That's wonderful, dear. It's just like him to want to help, and maybe it's a good way for you to get to know him. Carol, you've been so kind. It's my pleasure, Ainsley. Please let me know when I can stop in to check on you. After the niceties had been said, Ainsley had only a few minutes to run a brush through her hair and smooth on a touch of lip gloss. When the cuckoo clock announced the hour, she was back in the kitchen putting away groceries. The doorbell rang and she did her best not to run for the door. She opened it up to find 2 young men. They were clean-shaven but big, and both had their fair share of tattoos. They looked like extras in a prison movie. One of them removed his battered T-Wolves cap respectfully and stepped forward. My name's Jake. This is Joe, he said. Mr. Jensen sent us over. He said you had some furniture you needed moved. Oh, thank you so much for coming. Let me show you. Ainsley tried to control her disappointment. Had Eric really not come himself? Actually, it made perfect sense. She had kicked him to the curb so angrily last night. And besides, he had Cressida to spend his evenings with. She showed the men to the 3rd floor and indicated the items to be moved. They sent her back down to open doors for them. The men were strong and fast. A few trips later, and the 3rd floor was nearly empty. The final item to come down from the attic was an ancient walnut hope chest with a sulfur inlay design of howling wolves. Ainsley eyed it with appreciation. This was one piece of furniture she didn't remember from her childhood, even though it looked like it had been sitting upstairs forever. Please leave that in the study. Sure, Miss Connor. Ainsley ran her hand over the clasp that locked the lid down. There was probably a key somewhere in the house, but so far she hadn't uncovered it. Would you gentlemen happen to know how to jimmy one of these open if you don't have the key? I don't know if you can, ma'am, Joe said. That's an Amish chest. It's well built. Just smash the lock. I have a wrench in my truck. Hang on, Jake said. As soon as he was gone, Joe confided in her. Miss Connor, I don't think you should smash that lock. A chest with the sulfur inlay is rare and probably worth something. Most of them were made before the Civil War. I'd take it to an antiques dealer when you find the key. Thank you, Joe. I'm sure you're right. My aunt had one like that. She took it to Goodwill, and then we saw something like it on Antiques Roadshow. She still talks about it. Jake returned, and shrugged when she told him she'd changed her mind. How much do I owe you? She asked. We're taken care of, Miss Connor, Jake replied. Mr. Jensen gave us an hour of overtime, Joe added. Oh, well, thank you very much for your help. Ainsley tried hard not to think about generous Mr. Jensen too much. Who knew if these young men were wolves? The last thing she wanted was any extra attention from them. She sent them each out with a cold bottle of Coke. As they hopped into a pickup truck out front, a little green MG pulled into the driveway. Who could that be? Julian hopped out and smiled at her. He looked like a Banana Republic model. His snowy white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the top to reveal a few inches of his smooth, tan chest. He removed his sunglasses, and she could see the sexy little creases under his eyes. She couldn't help smiling back. He gestured for her to wait a moment, and he grabbed a reusable canvas bag from the passenger seat. He strode up to her at a leisurely pace. Miss Connor, I understand you had a lot to accomplish today. but there is no reason to be antisocial." His mouth quirked up in that knowing half-smile, and she knew that she would let him in. But she stalled for time anyway, fixing him with a cool gaze. "I'm new in town, Ainsley," Julian said in a low, teasing voice that was full of promise. "You won't abandon me to that lonely cottage, will you?" "Depends on what's in the bag," she teased with a straight face. "So pert, Miss Connor. Lucky for you, I've got just the thing to melt your defenses. A homemade hummus and pita tray, fresh from Caspian, and a bottle of Shiraz." Nice. That was a soft spot. Tarker's Hollow Mediterranean restaurant, Caspian, had fantastic fresh food, and she hadn't had a glass of wine in a long time. He smiled that enigmatic smile again, and she broke and smiled back. He reached out and slowly tucked her hair behind her ear. Then he took her arm and guided her into the house. Chapter 15. The kitchen was suffused with the warm light of the setting sun. It bounced off the coppery highlights in Julian's hair, reminding Ainsley briefly of an alpha being drawn. He had uncorked the wine as soon as he arrived. They sipped and chatted as Ainsley set the oak table. "So, how did you spend your day?" Julian asked. Ainsley pursed her lips as she peeled the plastic wrap off the hummus platter. Did she really have to go into the break-ins? How could she tell him what was going on in her life without talking about giant wolves? And Eric. And bad dreams. Is something wrong? When I got home last night, someone had been in the house. What? I had all my father's books organized in his study. When I got home, they were spread all over the floor. At first, I thought the study was just trashed, but then I realized the books were spread out in such a way that they must have been looking for something. What did they take? I'm not sure. So far, everything I've thought of is still there. All the first editions and valuables are here. Well, that's very lucky, Julian said solemnly. But I'm concerned about what someone might have wanted with your father's things. Do you have any idea what they might have been looking for besides books? Ainsley shook her head and got out serving utensils. She hadn't thought of anyone wanting anything of her father's other than books. Maybe it was a random break-in. Maybe they were looking for cash and didn't know the books were valuable, Julian suggested. I thought the same until this afternoon. What happened this afternoon? Ainsley smoothed her skirt down. Instantly, she remembered Julian running his hands down her thighs last night. She blushed and caught him following her movements out of the corner of her eye. She deliberately ignored him and turned to grab glasses for the ice water. I went to visit my dad's office at the college. It's been ransacked, too. Oh, dear. I didn't know as much about what he had there, but I could see that there were a ton of valuable books left behind. What would they have been looking for, Ainsley? Was your father working on something new for publication? It was an idea. I don't know, she admitted. But wouldn't they have stolen his laptop if that's what they wanted? They didn't touch the computers. Julian shook his head. What did the police say? They have no idea. They're going to catalog what they find on campus and get back to me. And at home? Ainsley looked down. I, cleared up the study before I thought to call them this morning. Are you telling me that you left in the middle of the night, came home to discover that an intruder had been in the house, cleaned up the evidence, and went to sleep alone without calling the police? When he put it that way, it sounded seriously reckless, but she couldn't exactly tell him she could turn into a gigantic wolf at any sign of danger. Instead, she shrugged. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time. Besides, what are the police going to do? Well, I can't believe they're going to let you stay in the house after what's happened. No one has threatened me. It seems like they just wanted something of my dad's. Why didn't they look for it before you came home? Wasn't the house empty for a couple of months? Ainsley froze. She hadn't thought of that. Why don't you stay with me for a few days? Thayer House isn't exactly crowded. I've really got to get finished with this house. I can't spend the rest of my life here. I have to get back to New York. Those penthouses won't sell themselves, eh? When you put it that way, it sounded superficial. But those penthouses were her career. What about you? What about me what? How long are you going to be in Tarker's Hollow? I'll be here for the fall semester. Then what? Wow, we really didn't devote much time to conversation last night, did we? Ainsley smiled wickedly and shook her head. You were all business, Miss Connor. Ainsley smirked. Did you just smirk? She shrugged and laid cloth napkins on the table. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her closer. She thought about resisting, but the wine was making her lazy, and besides, she was curious to see what would happen next. Why are you so obedient in the bedroom and so saucy outside of it? He whispered in her ear, tickling her neck with his warm breath. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, she said lightly, pulling her wrist out of his grip and sliding into her seat at the table. Impudent American girl, he declared with a smile. Hungry, too, she replied, piling her plate with cucumbers, olives, and a stack of warm pita wedges. And what do you mean, American? I'm from England. Where's your sexy accent? Seems pretentious to hold on to it when I've lived here for so long. I'll tell you what, Julian said as he topped off her wine glass. You can eat, and I will fill you in on the minor details, so that our fuck tonight doesn't have to be so goddamned anonymous. Ainsley tried to be annoyed at his presumptuousness, but couldn't. Instead, she smiled at him, popped an olive in her mouth, and gave him a queenly gesture to proceed. I grew up in rural England, he began. My mother was a seamstress. My father owned a small farm that had belonged to his sister. We had a happy life until a lady moved next door. She was a widow. Ainsley looked up. Oh shit, this is going to be a my parents got a divorce and I'll be forever traumatized story. What a shame that everything Generation X and younger had one. She prepared herself for a whiny evening. Her name was Eugenie. She was lovely. Long black hair, soft white skin, just like yours, Ainsley, and a smile that would make your stomach do flips. He paused to dunk a baby carrot stick in hummus and offered to feed it to her. She accepted and let her lips graze his fingers as she sucked the carrot out of his hand. I was only 12, but I would have done anything to earn one of her smiles, and I had plenty of opportunities. My mother felt dreadfully sorry for her and would send me over to do every kind of menial task. Okay, right. Ainsley adjusted her expectations. It was going to be one of those braggy, I had sex when I was 12 because ladies can't resist me stories. One day I was there to trim her hedge. I heard a small sound inside her cottage. At first I thought it might be a kitten, but as I listened it sounded a lot more like crying. I went inside to see what was wrong. When I got inside, I saw Eugenie curled up on the sofa crying. I didn't know what to do. I was 12 and very stupid socially. But the sight of her broke my heart, and so I naturally did what I would have done if she had been my own mother. I ran to kneel by her side and put my arm around her as best I could and patted her back. She looked at me in surprise, and the smile that came through her tears was the most beautiful I had ever seen. Do you miss your husband very much, Eugenie? I asked her. Oh, my friend, she said kindly. I do, but I'm not crying for him. Then why are you crying? I asked. She lifted her hand, and in it was a little book. The Cherry Orchard. Oh, Ainsley breathed. And that is the story of how I met the love of my life, Russian Lit. They smiled at each other. Then he selected a cucumber, dipped it in hummus, and offered it to her. Ainsley slowly licked a derp of hummus off the underside of the cucumber. Then she snatched the whole thing from him with her front teeth. Julian's eyes flashed. Behave, I'm not finished. Ainsley gave him an innocent look. My father wasn't wild about me reading so much. He wanted me to be more interested in small dairy farms, like he had been when he was a boy. And my mother realized how attractive the widow was and stopped sending me to Eugenie for errands. But it was too late. He paused and pulled a triangle of pita across the bowl of hummus. It left a wake behind it like a little sailboat. He ate it, sipped his wine, and continued. I was hooked, and I couldn't stop. We read them all together. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Chekhov. They broke our hearts. They made us laugh. They seemed somehow familiar to us in our lonely country life. I ignored my parents and my chores, and spent all the time I could with Eugenie. I would sit on the floor by her sofa and read to her. Sometimes she would read to me and carelessly run her fingers through my hair while she did. Ainsley leaned forward a bit. Maybe this was the part where the story would turn in one direction or the other. I ended up at university for Russian Lit and never looked back. Ultimately, it led me here. What about your parents? Have they forgiven you? They died a long time ago. But yes, they wanted me to be happy. And Eugenie, what happened to her? Did you ever... Ainsley couldn't finish. Stop with your endless questions, woman, I'm hungry. Ainsley realized he must have decided not to tell her the whole story. It actually made her curious, even though she was pretty sure she knew where he was going with it. She decided the best way to get at it was to back off and to get it from another angle, another time. Instead, she swept a baby carrot through the hummus and fed it to him. He took it and licked her fingers. The unexpected tickling contact made her giggle. I love that sound, Julian said simply, looking into her eyes. Ainsley felt almost uncomfortable under the sincerity of his gaze. She liked him a lot, she really did. He was everything she dreamed of. What was holding her back? Maybe it was just the strain of so much happening at once. She dismissed her doubts and returned his intense gaze with a shy smile. He rewarded her with a smile so warm she felt it in her belly. The smile lines at the corner of his eyes were so sexy. He must be in his mid-30s at least. How old was he? And how much wine has she had? As she wondered, he poured the rest of the bottle into her glass. Oh well, it had been a long day. It was nice to relax. And it wasn't like she could get really drunk anyway. Another benefit of being a wolf. She swirled the wine in her glass and took another sip. Chapter 16. Ainsley finished her wine as Julian looked at the books on the bench next to him. You enjoyed a little Dostoevsky with your breakfast this morning? Ainsley giggled again. Julian pulled back the pages of Crime and Punishment with his thumb and let them go until he came to what he was looking for. Then he paged through carefully and stopped. This one makes me think of you, Ainsley. We sometimes encounter people, even perfect strangers, who begin to interest us at first sight, somehow suddenly, all at once, before a word has been spoken. Whoa. That's very romantic, Ainsley began carefully. No, hold that thought. He grabbed the brothers Karamazov and thumbed and paged through quickly. Man, so long as he remains free, has no more constant and agonizing anxiety than to find, as quickly as possible, someone to worship. Oh. Julian put the book down. Much unhappiness has come into the world because of bewilderment and things left unsaid. The last quote hung in the air. Suddenly, Ainsley didn't feel like giggling anymore. I've never met anyone like you, Ainsley, Julian breathed. I know we just met, but you're already so important to me. Promise me that no matter what happens, you won't forget that. What do you mean? A dark look crossed his face like a storm cloud. Instead of answering, he took her hand and kissed each knuckle. His lips were so gentle. Her skin tingled as she felt a wave of giddiness. She leaned forward and ran her fingers through his hair. He groaned and pulled her other hand into his hair. His arms went around her waist and he kissed her like there was no tomorrow. His hair was silken between her fingers, and his kiss was doing crazy things to the rest of her body. There was urgency between them now that she hadn't felt last night. He drew back from their kiss and pulled her up. Once again, she found herself being led by the hand at top speed. She was beginning to feel like Alice in Through the Looking Glass, but unlike Alice, she knew just where she was headed. Her girlhood bed seemed to embrace her as Julian tossed her on her back. The room spun a little as he stripped off his clothes. She tried to lift herself on her elbows to undress, but he was on her in an instant. He shook his head playfully. "I'll take care of you, Ainsley. You relax, sweetheart. Is this okay?" "Yes, please." He smiled and lifted her up enough to unzip her new dress. It slid down her shoulders. He lowered her and lifted her hips to slide the dress off. The evening air felt cool on her skin, and she could feel her nipples stiffen and push against the lacy cups of her bra. Julian sat back on his heels and took her in. He looked like a hungry man looking at a feast. "Ainsley." She reached for him and he fell on her, kissing her cheeks, her neck, the tops of her breasts. In a moment, he had peeled off her bra and panties, and she was as naked as he was. Her whole body felt like it was floating on a wave of delicate pleasure. She was almost overwhelmed. She caught her fingers in his hair again. He gasped as she dragged him up to her face. He took her lips in his own and sunk his tongue deep into her mouth, while sliding his cock against her already moist opening without penetrating her. Her insides clenched and she cried out, grinding her hips up against him. She could feel his smile against her lips as she dragged his cock against her again. Her whole body ached for him to possess her. Her pussy yawned open for him, and soon his stiffened member was slick with her desire. He groaned in defeat. She almost cried with relief as he eased himself into her. He cradled her face in his hands, and his blue eyes held her as he found his way home. The pleasure of their joining was almost eclipsed by the intensity of his gaze. He looked happy and sad at the same time. Ainsley felt a tug at her heart, though whether it was love or compassion, she couldn't say. The whole thing felt like a dream. He whispered her name, and she closed her eyes and melted around him immediately. It was a gentle climax, slow, easy, and sweet as honey. As soon as she opened her eyes, his jaw tensed and he came, calling her name again as he searched her eyes in desperate concentration. She was asleep as soon as he rolled next to her. Her last memory was of his arms cradling her as she drifted off. Chapter 17. Ainsley awoke in a haze. Light bled through the shears in her room. Her head was pounding. Something happened last night. What was it? Julian. Ainsley lay back and stretched. She could feel to either side of the double bed, but he wasn't in there with her. Her first thought was that maybe he had been the one to sneak home this time, but she could sense him somewhere in the house. She sat up again and swung her feet to the floor, then had to stop and steady herself. She was lightheaded. How much wine had she drunk? Her wolf's chemistry normally metabolized alcohol almost as fast as she could drink it. Suddenly, her wolf was alive inside her like she had called it. Before she could think, she was crouched low to the floor. Soundlessly, she slunk to the door and into the hallway. She threw her head back and inhaled deeply. He was close. She closed her eyes and listened. His heart pounded away at a dull pace down the hall into her father's study. The wolf pushed at her bones and clawed at her skin, but somehow Ainsley held her back. She padded softly down the hallway, unsure of why she was sneaking around her own house, but knowing in her core that it was necessary. A ghastly blue light was coming out of the doorway of the study. Ainsley thought of the electric blue glow of Julian's eyes in her dream. Her wolf shuddered and her scalp prickled in sympathy. Still, she crept forward. She could see Julian's frame silhouetted in the azure glow. He was whispering something. She let go enough to let her wolf hear him. He repeated a phrase, not English. "Invenies quod perierat." A glowing blue arrow floated in front of him, spinning lazily inside a circle. Her wolf sensed a great wrongness. It pulled her straight into the room. She crouched for cover and slid backward to avoid knocking over a stack of books. Her hips slammed into the chest from the third floor with a resounding thud. No. The strange thing in the air swung almost to point at her. It looked like a compass settling on north. Julian spun and stared. "You?" Ainsley didn't stop to think about how he had betrayed her. She didn't think about the thousands of hours of acute agony over a lifetime of resisting her wolf at every full moon. She didn't think about her parents or past. She let the burden of thought and control fall to her feet and shatter into a million pieces. The wolf nudged her consciousness, offering, urging. Ainsley assented. Take me. Take over. Do what you were made to do. Her body was in rapture of anticipation. Every cell tingled and began to rearrange. She was going to shift. And she was going to kill Julian. We hope you've enjoyed this audio production of Curse of the Alpha, Episodes 1 and 2. The story continues in Curse of the Alpha, Episodes 3 and 4. Be sure to check it out on tashablack.com/audiobooks, or look for it on Audible and iTunes. If you liked it, please take a minute to let everyone know by leaving a review. And when you do, be sure to stop by tashablack.com to become part of my 1% Club and claim your reward. If you want to keep up to date with new releases, plus snag lots of freebies and giveaways, sign up for my mailing list at tashablack.com and get your free Tasha Black Starter ebook library just for signing up. And finally, thank you for taking the time to visit my world for a little while. I am extremely lucky to get to make up stories for readers, or listeners, like you. I am so grateful for your help in making it all possible. I couldn't do it without you. As long as you keep reading them, I'll keep writing them. Tasha. This has been Curse of the Alpha, Episodes 1 and 2, a Tarker's Hollow serial. Written by Tasha Black. Narrated by Addison Spear. Copyright 2014 by 13th Story Press. Production copyright 2015 by 13th Story Press.